microphones than we're typically used to seeing. Not everybody has one. There was a scheduling error. The AAVS folks were not able to make it out today, but they will be here tomorrow. So we'll have a normal setup and normal amount of microphones. But today, we're going to work with a lesser amount, and that's okay because you guys are going to get to be friends passing microphones around, right? Now, all of them are actually turned off. There's a switch on the top, and can I borrow y'all's for just a minute? So, right up here at the top. So they're all turned off right now. If you flip that switch when I call on you, your microphone will turn on, and you'll be able to speak. It's very simple. It works very quickly. Just flip it on, give it a second to catch up with the wireless, and you'll be ready to go. So I just want to make sure that everybody's aware, and I'm going to remind you probably a couple times throughout the day, but just like always, please speak clearly into the microphone so that everybody can hear you, and please remember to turn it on before you get going. Gil, would you like to open the meeting for us? And turn on your microphone.
Can I speak? All right, I can speak. Great. Well, am I supposed to gavel it, James? I don't have a gavel.
Thank you.
There we go. We're gaveled in. All right, welcome everyone to Savannah, Georgia for this full board of the Savannah Riverside Citizens Advisory Board. I trust that everyone got here safe and sound. If you didn't, I apologize. I hope everything's okay. We look forward to having a very good 2 days. We have a lot to cover today and tomorrow. So we are looking forward to great debate. I encourage each and every one of us around this table to speak up. We're going to cover some things today about our integrated priority list. That's extremely important for us to give to the Department of Energy so we can share with them our thoughts on what the most important things are going to be going forward into the 2021 budget. Please, I want to hear from you. I want to hear from your committees. Department of Energy wants to hear from us, and we want to give them exactly what we believe are the most important priorities. And I think that's something we need to have a good conversation about and talk around this table for. Is this the chair report? We're going to do the update later? Okay. If we can all rise for the pledge?
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Let's have a seat. We don't have a flag, so we are going to bypass the pledge. Before we get into the chair update, just wanted to share with the entire board that we did have the opportunity, Doug and I had the opportunity to spend last week in Augusta, Georgia with the Environmental Management Site-Specific Advisory Board for all the EM environmental management sites across the country. We got to sit together, find out what's going on at other sites. We got to share what's going on with our Savannah River site, and we also got some wonderful updates from the Department of Energy. I've asked Doug, and Doug's ready. He's going to share a little bit about what took place.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Savannah. Feels almost like I'm in H Canyon. It's so big in here, and everybody's so spread apart. But we had a great all-chairs meeting last week, and we started off day one with a tour-guided tour, which had about 40 participants on it, and our host was our own James Tanner, and also Kristen Huber. We started off at the Savannah River with a Savannah River overview from Stuart McPhee, which was very interesting. And from there, we drove to E area, the H area tank farm, and we had a presentation from Maxine Maxid, that stepped on the bus and gave us that update. We also went to the J area, the SWPF area, and we also had a briefing from Shane Farrell there. We went to M area, and there we had a presentation from Chris Bergen on the cleanup and the closure. And we ended up that day of that site tour with a visit to the ecology lab there. And we had a great time there looking at some of those wild animals there. Saw some alligators. Also saw I never thought that I could see a lizard that did not have legs, but they showed us a lizard that didn't. They also showed us some spotted turtles that are very, very, I understand, valuable, and a lot of people trap and try to sell them abroad. But that was a great day. Now, on the second day, we started off with the opening remarks from Mike Bundy, and I'm sure he'll give us the same update today. And we had Mark Gilbertson, who is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary, that talked to us mainly about the fact that it's been 30 years since the EMSSAB has been established. And it was started 30 years ago by Admiral Watkins and Leo Duffy as the lead program manager. And they had 10 governors from 10 states that started the initial tenets for the program itself. Ann White was not able to be there. She had to appear, I guess, before subcommittee. So Mark kind of highlighted some of the topics that Ann would be talking to them about. And some of those topics were the success at the various sites. And she did highlight, or he did highlight, the success that we've had here at the Savannah River site with the work that was done on the ASH program, which was ahead of schedule and saved $9 million to the taxpayers. Mark also highlighted that when the program, the environmental management program started, we started with about 107 sites. Today, we only have about 16 sites that are still out there. And he also talked about the fact that there was 3,000, I guess, plus square miles of environmental management landage that needed to be taken care of. And now I think we're down to about 300 square miles. Mark also talked about the success of the National Library, which he was a part of at one time. And he talked about all the sites having accurate schedules and data. We ended up that day, part of that day, in the middle there with the chairs roundtable, which is mainly an update from all the chairs on their various sites. We had a budget briefing from Steve Trishman, who Gil will talk more on that in a minute. And we also discussed 2 recommendations, which Gil also will be bringing up later on today. One of them was the environmental management review of cleanup milestones, and the other one was improving EM's science and technology program. On day 3, Jeff Griffin, who is the Associate Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Field Operations, talked about PIMP's guidance. Not the pimps that walk the streets and all of that, but he talked about he talked about a new performance and valuation measure plan, which the environmental management is coming up with. He also talked about the priorities of in-state and contracting, and he talked about the transitioning to in-state contracts. All of this falls under the consistency in contractor accountability. Jeff talked about safety and security and also Q&A changes. He talked about technology development, and he also discussed opportunities for accelerating the work closure, which the art of the possible is what he talked under. He talked about the 2019 accomplishments from the sites, and then he finalized his presentation by talking about the efforts to create an industry culture that is focused on in-state contracting. So this was kind of a brief synopsis of what our 3 days of conference went like. And also, if you are really, really interested on seeing what we went through on that day, just like our meetings are live streamed and on YouTube, you can also go on there to get the in-depth, up-close and personal look at our past conference. Gil, I'll pass it over to you.
Don't think I can follow that up. At least not the one comment. That was awesome. Thanks, Doug. Doug really gave a very good explanation of everything that was spoken. There was a couple things, 2 things that I really wanted to share from the all-chair meeting. Later, as we spoke earlier, we'll be talking about our integrated priority list. Well, that's not just a Savannah River thing. That's every complex, every site within EM does that as well. But it's not just there. The actual EM has a priority list for the entire organization. So Mark Gilbertson shared with us that they are compiling a IPL list of the 16 sites as well. So what we do today and send to DOE will be used to help them get those top 16, their priority list for all 16. Doug mentioned the new approach to evaluating the contractors. It's called an end state approach. It's still relatively new. It's still something that we were just getting a taste of, just them getting an explanation from the Department of Energy. Our contractors, for those that live in the area that are affected, know how much contractors mean to our local economies and how much they mean to our local businesses and things. I understand, talking to people who work at the Savannah River site, sometimes a contractor change may just be the paycheck comes from somebody else and the work continues to go on. However, in our communities, it's a very large deal. So when I start hearing situations of how we're going to be looking at contracting and awarding awards, my ears kind of perk up. So this end state is exciting. What it means is it's not the end state of a complete contract, but they are looking at it as a task-by-task issue, and they will actually be looking at end state of each individual task. I wish I could explain it to you better, but quite honestly, I haven't wrapped my mind around it all the way, but it is something that's being discussed. It is something that will be continuing to be discussed. Our site manager still has the authority over the contracts. He still handles the grading and things. However, Department of Energy wants to make that grading a little more even across all EM sites. So if our site manager would grade our contractors at a 30, and I'm just going to say Hanford because it's on my mind. If Hanford's site, their site manager graded their same contractors at a 90, what is the rhyme or reason for that? So Department of Energy is trying to create a more even playing field for contractor grading. So that's really what happened over the last 3 days. Doug and I kind of had 3 days with CAB last week, and then we're back here today. But I really want to give a big shout out to our support staff, James and your team, Delisa, Heather, yes, Frederica, did an absolute wonderful job hosting this meeting. When we go to these meetings around the country, they're always nice. However, the level that James and his team performed was phenomenal. When we go to just a silly little thing like if there's a draft recommendation that needs to be updated, it's not silly at all, but we need the paperwork. Sometimes that's very difficult to get. It was seamless here. James handled that with ease. When we have the events and there's a hospitality event, usually about half the people attending the meeting show up. Everyone showed up to the hospitality event and just had a great time. Doug and I each and every chair and vice chair came up to us and said this was one of the best meetings they've ever attended. And I just want to take a moment out and thank you, James, and thank Delisa and you guys, all of you. Wonderful job. Thank you. This meeting, we have some important, again, going back to important discussions, we have the IPL to go over, we have some recommendations to go over, and we have some presentations to consume and then go back to our committee meetings. I ask that everyone be engaged today. This is a very important meeting about the future, specifically 2021 and beyond of the Savannah River site. And we are here to give DOE the information that we believe to be the most important. Ask questions, give opinions, share, and let's come together as one board. And with that, that's all I have.
Thanks, Gil. So just want to go over a few of the ground rules that we have for every meeting. I want to ask everybody to hold your questions towards the end of the presentation, if you would. When it is time for questions, if you don't mind, stand your card, your name tent, bless you, your name tent on end so that I can see it and know that you have a question. If you don't mind. Yep, just stand it up just like Joyce did. That's how we're going to indicate that you have a question today. I'll ask that we also stay on topic. We'll try to keep our questions focused to the agenda item at hand. Please avoid side conversations. I know all the microphones are currently off, but if we accidentally leave them on, I think you'll be surprised the distance that you can be away from them and still be picked up. So they do have quite a range on them, so please make sure that you keep your side conversations to a minimum. Like Gil said, ask questions. If you're curious, you want to know something, please let us know. Our subject matter experts, especially everybody you're going to see tomorrow, and John Richards today for EPA, they're very passionate about what they talk about, and they really want to share it. So if you're curious about anything, you're not clear about something, put your name up and let's let them know. Again, just want to remind you with the microphones, when it is time for questions, please flip the switch on the top. When you're done, please take a look at it. If you flip it off, the light on the screen will go out and it'll be clear. And then the last thing I want to ask is phones and pagers, if you would please, put them on silent. Are there any questions for our rules today? Okay, great. So I just want to go over a quick agenda for the day. We just did the opening and the chair update. Up next, we're going to have the agency updates. Mike Budney will start off in just a moment, giving a DOE review, and then we'll go through EPA and DHEC as well. Committee updates. Everybody will get a chance to talk about what they did in April. Is it already May? Wow. So what they did back in April, and they'll update you what they're bringing forward to this meeting. We'll take a short break. EPA will talk about their oversight role here at Savannah River site, and then we'll go into those recommendations. So you see on the agenda, we have quite a lot to discuss, as Gil talked about. We do have the integrated priority list discussion. We'll make sure that that's up on the screen, and you'll be able to walk through it, and we'll talk about what everybody's topics are. The top two under the recommendations are the chair's recommendations. Those are what were produced last week at the chair's meeting. We've brought copies for everyone here. Homework tonight definitely would be to read over those and make sure that you understand them. When we do talk about them, though, please remember that chair's updates, we don't edit. We take them as they are. So the entire site, or the entire complex, all the other boards, have to vote on the exact same thing. So we don't edit chair's recommendations. We can talk about them, we can discuss them. You can even tell us what you think ought to be different. But it's going to be an up or down vote at the end of the day, okay? Then the last two, we have two more recommendations that we're going to talk about. They came out of the Nuclear Materials Committee. They did a great work back in April, and I can't wait to hear them talk about it. And then we'll take some public comments. We'll break at 4:45, and then we'll recess for the day. Any questions about our agenda? All right. Gil, we have a couple of new faces today. Let's talk about that.
There's just a lot of moving parts. Hi, it's Candace. Kate? What I'm going to ask us to do, because whenever I'm a new person, I love being called out and speaking in front of everybody. So what I'm going to ask us to do is go around the table, introduce ourselves, and we'll let Cadence and Malcolm introduce themselves in a normal, natural way. So if you just say your name, what county you're from, how long you served on the cab, and why you serve on the cab, I'd appreciate it. And Brian, I'm going to kick it over and ask you to start. And I didn't even think about the microphone situation. My apologies.
Let's do this. Let's just pass around the exact same microphone, and I'll collect it from you at the end, and we'll bring it back over to this side of the table. That way we don't have to worry about switching things on and off. Go for it, Brian.
I'm Brian Chimsak. I've been on the cab now for about a year. I live and work in Beaufort County, and I joined this primarily just to gain some more knowledge about what was going on at the site. And I can say in that year I've definitely learned a lot more than I even thought I would, so it's been good.
Jerry Mossbarger. I live in Aiken. This is my second board meeting, so I'm fairly new. I joined the board because I care. I want to make sure that what is done at the site doesn't impact the community in an adverse way, obviously, but also want to make sure the site is treated fairly.
Hi, I'm Dan Kaminsky. I live in Beach Island, Aiken County, and I've been on the board now. This is my 5th year, hard to believe, and I joined also because I care about this community and can never do enough to help it.
Hi, I'm Bob Smith, Aiken County. This is my 3rd year on the board, and I joined for a couple of reasons. One was to learn more about what was going on at the site myself, but also to possibly help carry some of the word and understanding back to our public, because I do think there's a good bit of misinformation out there about what's going on at the site and what the value is that's being done.
My name is Jim Giel. I'm from Beaufort County, and I've been on the board for just over a year. My interest has always been in the technology, and I wanted to try and learn about what happens at SRS and to be able to dispel or correct a lot of the misinformation that seems to float around.
I'm A.K. Hassan from Augusta, Richmond County. My term began February 15th, 2019, so I'm still a newbie. But I'm very interested in the educational aspect in terms of learning exactly what is going on at SRS so that I can carry that message back to the community and become an advocate for the stakeholders of Augusta, Richmond County.
Carlos Cato, Edgefield County, going into my 2nd year now with the cab. I've got 3 generations of family members who have worked out on site and have always been curious about the site and its operations, and so was eager to join the cab so that I could learn as much as I could and be a service to the community.
Good afternoon, Ruth Hollingsworth, new to CAB 2019. I live in Aiken County, and I want to contribute any way I can to the Citizens Advisory Board, and what is being done at Savannah River is incredibly important to all of us in the state and also the whole country. So it's exciting to be a part of this. Thank you.
My name is Bobby Williams. I've been on the CAB for, this is going on my 3rd year. I worked at Savannah Riverside for 36 years, so I got on the CAB to learn more, or learn what I didn't know about Savannah Riverside and bring community awareness.
Good afternoon. I'm Eleanor Hobson. I have been on the CAB since 2014, so that makes me the senior member around the table. Perhaps. I'm from Augusta, Richmond County. I joined the CAB because I was very concerned about environmental management and the education of others about the SRS site, and I have learned a lot since I have been on the CAB. And I am looking forward to others joining the CAB because I'm the ANO committee chair.
Hello, my name is Malcolm Phillips, and this is my first meeting. Why I elected to come onto the committee, my entire background has been in nuclear, both in the power generation side and the DOE side, so I'm very familiar with the issues that y'all guys are facing and what y'all are tilting with now. So that's primarily the reason that I joined. I look forward to going forward and helping any way that I can. I have one other comment, by the way, and that is that I have Parkinson's, and my head shakes, as y'all guys can see. And I just say that because when we're in discussions, it doesn't mean that I'm agreeing with you or disagreeing with you. It just means my head's shaking, so I'll just let it pass there.
Good afternoon. I'm Jim Folk with the Department of Energy. My day job here is as co-DDFO. My rest of my job, I'm the assistant manager for waste disposition. Been on site for about 36 years.
Michael Michelanis with the Department of Energy as well. I'm the other co-DDFO. In my day job, I'm the assistant manager for nuclear materials, and I've been here on site since about 2002.
Good afternoon. I'm Amy Boyette. I'm the director of the Office of External Affairs for the Department of Energy at Savannah Riverside. I've been out there 27 years. I started out with the environmental management and then moved over to the NNSA for about 10 years, and I just came back to EM about a year ago.
Hi, I'm Mike Budney. Good afternoon. I've been here for about 14 months. I'm the site manager for environmental management.
John Richards with EPA Region 4 in Atlanta. I'm the acting Federal Facility Agreement project manager for EPA.
Beth Cameron, and I work for South Carolina DHEC. I am over the ESOP program.
Heather Cathcart with South Carolina DHEC. I'm the technical remediation coordinator for the federal remediation section.
Dave Isley, Aiken County. I also worked out at the site for 36 years, and I joined the CAB to keep track of what goes on out there, and that has worked out very well.
I'm Charles Hilton from Aiken County. I'm fascinated with Savannah Riverside, what went on in the 30, 35 years that it was operated, and I'm also fearful of the legacy waste as I spent 40 years in the environmental field. So it gives me a way to keep up with what's going on out there.
Good afternoon, Narendra Malik. I'm from Martinez, Georgia, and I have been on the CAB for 3 years. Actually, this is my 3rd year, and I chair Waste Management Committee. I worked at Savannah Riverside for 24 years, and I joined CAB because I was concerned with the environmental issues and socioeconomic issues. Somebody asked me yesterday, how safe is SRS? I said, it's safer than your home.
Good afternoon. I'm Greg Murray, Augusta, Richmond County. I am just starting my second year on the CAB. I've enjoyed it immensely, learned a lot, and look forward to learning more about it.
Hi, I'm Joyce Underwood, and I too am from Martinez, which is Columbia County. And this will start my third year, I guess, because my first meeting was going to be this meeting 2 years ago. And why did I join? Short answer, Duran Duran. A lot of you don't understand that, but we'll get to that later. Long answer, I'm a military spouse, and I have a heart for service, and I like to be involved in the communities where I live because we move around a lot, and this seemed like a great opportunity. So here I am. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Betty Cook from Hampton County, and for ones of you who don't know, that's right out of Allendale and Barnwell. I'm just a little bit further south. I joined the CAB. This is my second year. And I became interested because I've lived in Hampton County all my life, and believe this or not, but I remember when Savannah River Site was called the bomb plant. I don't know how many of y'all know that, but I was really interested. I went on a public tour in August a couple of years ago and became interested in the CAB, and I am very impressed with everything I've learned. It's just new knowledge every day, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. And thank you so much.
Good afternoon. I'm Dave Vavakis. I've been on the CAB for just over 2 years now. I'm vice chair of the Strategic and Legacy Management Committee. Been involved in community service for most of my life, and when I moved to Aiken, I thought this might be a good way that I could help along with some other things. So,
Carl Steen, Aiken County. I'm a retired banker. About 40-some years experience as a public information officer and spokesperson for New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ-listed banks. This is my first year on the board, and I'm on the board, as in my prior life, to help understand things and promote understanding of what goes on at the Savannah River site. Thanks.
Candace Cave. I'm from Aiken County. I manage Keep Aiken County Beautiful. I applied to be a member of CAB because I love learning, and I just felt like SRS is such a prominent and important part of our community that I just wanted to learn more.
Excuse me. Doug Howard, retired military from Evans, Georgia. I think everybody knows that I joined the CAB to kill hogs. Just kidding. No, I really joined the CAB because I'm interested to make sure that generations from now, young men and women will look back and say that we did what we could while we had a chance to do so.
Gil Allensworth. I've been on the CAB for 5 years. Dan and I joined together with 4 other people, and we're the only 2 suckers that are still here. I joined the CAB because my family, there's 3 generations of employees at Savannah River Site, and I just didn't understand the thing. And once I got involved, I really started to care. I care about my community, and I appreciate everything Savannah River has done for my family. And that's it.
All right. Thanks, Gil. Thank you. I know that took a few minutes, but I really think it was worth the time to take a moment and pause. Let's get to know each other, know who everybody is around the table. And I'm sure we're going to recover that time later in the day. I know it. So, Mike, let's go ahead and go into the manager's updates, and we'll start with DOE.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Hey, good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here with you in Savannah. I don't think I made the trip down here to Savannah last year, but I'll try to give you the best update I can since our last meeting in March in Augusta. First, welcome aboard, Candace. We're delighted to have you on the team, and thanks for that work on keeping Aiken beautiful, because we just moved here a year ago, and we love the place. So, welcome aboard to you, too. That's a naval term, welcome aboard. Your presence causes me to want to take a closer look at our process for bringing people on board, because it's come to my attention I have allowed another West Pointer to slip into the issue, but it'll be great. Glad to have you. Hey, so Gil mentioned the 30th anniversary of the SSAB. This month is actually the 25th anniversary of the SRS cab. It was in 1994 that in May, that the first formal meeting of this body was held. And a DOE headquarters representative attended in person to deliver the appointment letters from the Assistant Secretary and officially recognized SRS cab as a DOE EM advisory board. Over those 25 years, you've had nearly 150 full board meetings and 362 recommendations to the Savannah River site. So congratulations on that 25 years. We look forward to many more. In terms of the update, most importantly, we held the annual SRS Ultimate Turkey Hunt on April 5th and 6th. This is done in conjunction with the National Wild Turkey Federation and U.S. Forest Service Savannah River, and it's for wounded warriors and mobility impaired hunters. We had 24 hunters from 6 states, and they managed to take in 20 turkeys off the site. So well done to those guys. It's a great event. I try to get out there to see them every time, and they really appreciate the effort those folks put in to make that thing happen. Okay, contract updates. Management and operations, as I've reported previously, we postponed action on the draft request for proposals for the SRS Management and Operations acquisition. The current contract runs through July 31st, and we're working on follow-on steps to address that issue. Liquid waste contract, DOE approved an 18-month extension to the current liquid waste contract just right at the end of March. And so Savannah River Remediation will continue to work that contract through September 30th, 2020. The Paramilitary Security Services contract, we've issued the final request for proposals. Those proposals were actually received last week, and now we'll go through the process of reviewing those and making a determination. That current contract held by Centera runs through October 7, 2019. The President's budget for FY20, his request was submitted, and it includes about $1.6 billion for Savannah River site, $91 million above the FY 2019 enacted level. And it does include a request to fund the Advanced Manufacturing Collaborative, which would be located on University of South Carolina, Aiken, assuming that that budget is approved and that item remains in there. Nuclear materials program, H Canyon, we're still processing all 3 sources of material. The high flux isotope reactor cores coming from Oak Ridge, material test reactor fuel, and target residue material from Canada. Within the H Canyon, we used 2 robotic crawlers recently to get our first survey of the entire 1,000 feet of the tunnel. It was very successful. We had a higher resolution camera that enabled us to get some good pictures of the entire tunnel, including elevated regions. We've done some preliminary review of those videos and don't see any remarkable further degradation compared to what we saw 2 years ago last time we did it, but that's going under further, more close review. L area continues to receive domestic and foreign research reactor fuels. Carry area continues to support removal of the plutonium from South Carolina in association with NNSA. And we're making good progress in 235F to reduce the risk of that situation. We've removed over 100 grams of plutonium-238 to date. So it's a very tough, very challenging operation we're doing there, but the team has been doing a remarkable job of getting that material out. I think that'll lead us to a closure on a defense Facilities Nuclear Safety Board recommendation in a fairly near term, and then we'll go on to how we're going to finally take care of deactivating that facility. Liquid waste program, when I updated you in March, we'd produced 12 canisters in FY19. We're now up to 21. Of course, production of those canisters is tied to salt processing and ARP MCU. The MCU, the modular caustic side solvent extraction unit, has been operating well. We replaced a component in there that was clogging up with a sort of a filter that we call a coalescer, with one that was twice as long, twice as much surface area, and that served us well, and it's kept that unit up and running since we did that work earlier in the fiscal year. Saltstone facility has processed nearly, well, this is nearly, we give a pretty exact number for nearly, 618,600 gallons of decontaminated salt solution this fiscal year. The tank closure cesium removal project has gone very well. We processed about 150,000 gallons using that system, and we're waiting the results of the tank. We've prepared some more solution to go through it. I think that sampling is supposed to be done by about well, end of last week, I think. So we're waiting for those sample results, and then we'll be able to continue processing through that system, which we call Ticker. Saltstone disposal unit 7 is going up. We got 37 additional columns, so 92 of the 208 columns are erected, and 9 out of 24 wall sections. So it's going up pretty quickly. We did enter negotiations with South Carolina DHEC and EPA regarding our FFA, and also with our FFA and milestones. Most of those have been successfully negotiated to be delayed essentially till we can get the new liquid waste contractor in place, and then we'll settle on the exact dates for the milestones. But in consideration for the suspension, we've agreed to 5 supplemental closure activities, 2 projects in soil and groundwater program, and 4 in the liquid waste program, and committed to initiate negotiation of new tank closure milestones after the notice to proceed to a new contract. That includes the liquid waste program scope. We appreciate the tough but fair negotiations by our friends at DHEC and EPA, and I think it's come up with a good compromise to keep moving the projects forward. Salt waste processing facility continues startup and commissioning activities. Chemical introduction, as you know, was authorized in November. Initial batch of nitric acid and sodium hydroxide was successfully loaded into cold chemicals area, and solvents required to complete initial testing were loaded in solvent hold tank. Initial batch of simulates have all been staged. We expect this project to be completed on time, on schedule, and within the projected cost, and we're tracking at present towards bringing the system online towards the end of the year. The salt waste program, or solid waste program, excuse me, solid waste. Field work associated with the True Pack readiness assessment has been completed in preparation for transuranic waste shipments later this year. Contractor is addressing identified opportunities for improvement. We are currently working with Carlsbad Field Office to complete certification of additional waste and schedule upcoming shipments. In soil and water cleanup, the wetland area at Dunbarton Bay, we've begun ash removal in this area. It's going to excavate 12 acres of coal ash, approximately 25 cubic yards, with disposal at the Three Rivers landfill, scheduled for completion December 2019. In the P area, on April 8th, we met its official field start date for the installation of a permeable reactive barrier at P area groundwater, ahead of the scheduled regulatory due date of April 30th. This will contain up to 800 tons of zero valent iron, which will just, so drilling for the installation of the underground wall is scheduled for the end of May and expected to last 6 to 9 months. In infrastructure, our one major project we have going on is the A Area Firewater Project, and that's on track to be completed by July 30th. The pump house is in place with its electric pump and backup diesel, and the storage tank is going up right now. So finally, a note about the Savannah River National Lab. You probably read about they suspended work recently in April. This was a preemptive measure taken by Dr. Mashidi to refocus his staff on our priorities of safety and security in the summer months. It had a number of smaller events, just too many of them for anyone's liking, trending in the wrong direction. So the leadership there at the lab decided the review was necessary. The suspension was lifted April 22nd after a 2-week review, and they have a deliberate and methodical resumption of all non-essential work, and then they'll get back up to full operations here very shortly. So they remain focused on safe and disciplined operations. So that concludes my my formal update, subject to any questions you may have.
All right, so let's remember, let's put our name or tents up just like Dave just did. Make sure that you click on the microphone before you start speaking. And Dave, yours is the only one up right now, so let's start with you.
August Cab. Thank you very much for your remarks. Regarding number 10, the Savannah River National Laboratory, as you mentioned, there was a halt to the non-essential work. It's reported in the Aiken, South Carolina newspaper. The newspaper reported that a similar, what they termed as a safety pause, occurred last year also. Is this a systemic problem, or is this just a specific, isolated couple of cases that have occurred?
I guess the issues last fall were a little more significant than these. These were mostly procedure compliance under maintenance, you know, properly tracking through the procedures, the corrective action maintenance work that was being done in place. So, which is not what we operating nuclear facilities like to see. We like to see people actually follow the procedures as they were written. We take our time to develop these procedures, make sure they got all the right steps in them. We expect the folks to use them exactly as they're written, and where they can't, we expect them to stop work and go get the procedure fixed. We weren't quite seeing that, so we're still evaluating because we want to make sure that the actions, the corrective actions we put in place last year were sufficiently implemented, and make sure we haven't missed something that caused these other minor operations, procedural non-compliance things to occur, see if there's some disconnect or we missed something. So we're still working on the analysis of exactly what caused this.
Okay. Malcolm. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you very much for the update. I had one other question with regard to that. I assumed that the stop work was a function of the corrective action program where there was a significant events or events that totaled something that y'all deemed to be significant. My question was the stop work instituted by DOE or by the contractor?
No, it was instituted by the contractor. So Dr. Majidi is the lab director, and he works for Savannah River Nuclear Solutions.
And one other question, if I could, and that revolves around your description of events that occurred across the complex, if you would. And you gave anecdotal comments on events. Just a general comment, are you pleased with schedule and budget progress with regard to the contractors? And if so, if not, is there any outliers that you're more concerned with?
We're pleased with the schedule and conduct and the effort put forth by our contractors at Savannah River site. So I think those in general, I mean, you look at their scores when we do the feed scores, they range from about 92 to 94%. And that's, you can't say much more than that. That's the bottom line when we do the evaluation.
So they're pretty much tracking the schedule then?
Yeah, yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, Malcolm. Doug?
Doug Howard. Mike, you mentioned Centera, and you said 2019. Is that their contract end, or could you elaborate more on that?
Yes, their contract, the current contract with Centera, the end of the performance period is October 7th, 2019.
Okay. Do you foresee any problems as what happened last year, or something right now
So to be clear, there has been no problem with the Centera contract. But if you're referring to the change in the liquid waste contract where we didn't make an award and decided to cancel that, we don't foresee anything like that associated with Centera.
Okay, but there
or
was...
more correctly, with the paramilitary solicitation.
Okay. So, am I mistaken? Wasn't there some problems with the work stoppage or the strike that went on last year with Centera?
The Centera strike occurred well before my tenure here, so it certainly didn't occur last year.
All right.
Yeah, I came 1 March, so it was well before that. Yeah. They shouldn't, the contract solicitation shouldn't be connected with that in any way. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? Going around once. Thank you, Mike. John, let's move it over to EPA.
John Richards, Region 4. I'm the acting FFA manager for EPA for Savannah River, and because I have a talk later, I'll reserve most of my remarks for that time. But I did want to mention, especially after Mike brought it up, the suspension agreement that is a very big deal for EPA and the state. And Franklin Hill, our Superfund division director that we briefed and signed it within the last 3 or 4 weeks, was very satisfied in spite of the delay, mostly from the contract. But we really appreciate Jim Folk and his team's efforts to provide us multiple projects that satisfied him and us, our Savannah River team, that are being accelerated due to the delays in the tanks. So we appreciate that. And again, I'll have more when I do my talk later. Thanks.
So like John mentioned, he's going to have a talk a little bit later. Do we have any questions in the immediate that we don't want to wait for? Okay. Heather, you ready for a DX?
Hi, as I mentioned before, my name's Heather Cathcart. I work with South Carolina DHEC, and I work with Susan Fulmer. She is the FFA project manager, but she could not be here today. So as John just mentioned, South Carolina DHEC appreciates the effort that DOE put into the recent 2019 suspension agreement. It is amenable to everyone with the acceleration of activities in the support of the closure of the liquid waste tank farms and the soil and groundwater projects at D area, the 690N process heat exchanger repair facility, also known as the Ford building. Short and sweet. Y'all have any questions? Oh, also, sorry, this is
Beth Cameron, DHEC. I just wanted to let you know there are some CDs for our ESOP 2017 data report. If you haven't gotten one already, they're out there at the public comment table.
All right. Any questions for DHEC? Y'all just want to leave, don't you? No, that's it? All right. So up next we have the committee updates. We're going to start with the Administrative and Outreach Committee. Bobby, would you mind turning on that microphone in front of you and handing it to Eleanor? Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Okay. Eleanor Hobson, CAB, Administrative and Outreach Committee Chair. Welcome to Savannah. We're downstream of the Savannah River, and we love meeting here. The Administrative and Outreach Committee welcomes the new members, and we are always ready for new members to apply. Applications will be made available online, and you may go to our website, srscab.gov, and all of the information that you need about the cab will be there. We are in the process of looking at summer outreach, of course, all of the activities that take place and the tours. And that is all I have for today.
Okay.
James.
Any questions for A&O? All right, seeing none. Joyce, would you mind turning on that microphone in front of you, and let's talk about FDSR.
Hello, I'm Joyce Underwood, the chair of the Facilities Disposition and Site Remediation Committee. This is my co-chair, Betty, for all you new people. Is Avery still in here?
She's over there.
Okay, for everybody who's new, that's Avery. She's our point of contact. I think that's kind of important, so because it took me a long time to figure that out when I started, so I'm giving you the leg up on that. Welcome to beautiful historic Savannah. I'm so happy that we're all here today because it's awesome. Before I go on, Doug, what you said about why you're on the cab is beautiful. I just wanted to say that in front of everybody. That was the most gorgeous thing I think I've heard in a while. At our committee meeting in April, we talked about the IPL list a lot, and I don't know that we came to any kind of a consensus, but we're going to talk about that tomorrow and today even. So remember what we said and put your 2 cents in. Be brave to all my committee members and non-committee members because your voice matters. It's very important. We have one open recommendation. Is it open or is it, how does it work?
You do have an open recommendation.
Okay, it is open. Okay, so we have an open recommendation about solar panels, and we are not going to do anything with it until after we have heard the upcoming presentation on solar panels in September. And we didn't really generate any recommendations last committee meeting because the ESOP report was really good and we didn't have anything to add. This time we're going to hear from John at the EPA and the D&D presentation tomorrow, which is by Angela Holmes and Chris Berggren. Take notes because I'm really excited about that presentation and I'm really excited to talk about it in June. And that will be on June 25th at 6:15 in Aiken, and I hope to see all of my committee members there, please. And anybody new that hasn't been assigned to a committee, ours is an awesome committee and you should come. Thank you.
Thanks, Joyce. Any questions for Joyce? All right, just for the benefit of everybody who's new, not just today, but new this year, recommendation statuses, obviously it can get a little confusing sometimes. Before you approve it, it's a draft. After you approve it, we call it pending, and once DOE responds to it, it's open. And it remains open until the committee has a chance to discuss it and discuss the DOE response and decide to close it. Okay, so that's the definitions we use: draft, pending, open, and closed. Most of your recommendations obviously are closed. There's only a couple of them that remain open because the committees just haven't really had a chance to either discuss the response yet, or in the case of the solar panel one that Joyce was talking about, there's going to be a presentation later in the year. Let's get all the information in, make sure that all your questions are answered before we move on. Any questions about that? All right. Charles, you ready for nuclear materials?
Thank you, Charles Hilton, CAB. First, I'd like to thank David Eisel, my co-chair, and I'd like to thank the members of the Nuclear Materials Committee. We did have a lengthy meeting in April, and we got a lot accomplished. Mr. Bundy, I could not help but to notice when you did the nuclear materials program update, you started out with H Canyon and you ended up with 235F. I just wondered if that could be perceived as what you were most proud of to what you wish would go away. However, out of our committee, we're bringing 2 recommendations to the full board for approval, which addresses both H Canyon and 235F. So we will have detailed discussions on that later on in today's meeting. Thank you.
Emphasis on detail, right, Charles? Emphasis on detail?
Yes.
Dave, are any questions for nuclear materials before we move on? All right. Dave, you're filling in for Tom today, right? All right.
Dave Vavakas, CAB. The Strategic and Legacy Committee meeting on April the 16th, we concentrated all of our time on discussing and trying to finalize our committee's input to the fiscal year 2021 budget priorities for SRS. We felt strongly that liquid waste stabilization and disposition, the PBS 14C, should remain the #1 priority.
Any questions for Strategic and Legacy Management? Narinder?
Is it on?
If it's turned on.
Narendra Malik, Waste Management. We have a couple of recommendations, open recommendations. We'll be discussing it tomorrow. And tomorrow will be very good presentation on liquid waste system plan, RAV 21. Thank you.
You know, I shortened the time for the committee updates, and then y'all made it even shorter today. All right, so we flew right through that, and we're right up on when we would be taking a break. Let's go ahead and do that. I know we just got started, but let's put some separation between what we've done and what we're about to do. Let's be back in our seats around 2:15, please. 2:15, thank you. So for those of you who are wondering, no, we're not actively trying to freeze you out of the room. We did ask the hotel to turn it up just a little bit so that it's not quite so cold. Some of the folks at the ends are sitting directly under vents, so it's a fun and unique experience for them. Just for those who don't know, out in the hotel lobby next to the coffee, they actually have scarves for people who are cold. I'm not going to wear one, but I got a coat, so I'm okay. But some folks may be so inclined. I think we have almost everybody back, so let's go ahead and get started with EPA's oversight role. John, are you ready?
Yes, can you hear me? And he gave me the options staying here or going up there, so unless there's an objection, I'll be happy to come up there if you want. Otherwise, I'll talk from here. Okay. So I'm John Richards. I'm the acting federal facility agreement project manager for EPA for Savannah River, and I have been for about the last year and a half. A lot of you know Rob Pope, who's obviously still involved with the Savannah River, but he's our current acting section chief in our region. We had our section chief retire in December, and he's still very much involved. He's worked with Savannah River many, many years, especially in project manager and FFA roles, so still my mentor, and he has other projects too. He works still on Tyndall Air Force Base, a private site in Beaufort, and now with all of his manager duties. Just to let you know more about me, I've been in EPA right at 30 years. I've been a radiation expert my whole career, and I've been working with Savannah River in my radiation role in those whole 30 years. And then around 2010, during the Recovery Act time, that's when I moved over to start taking over some projects at Oak Ridge, Paducah, and Savannah River, and also have a couple of private sites, Maxey Flats, and a commercial site that has no radiation. That's how desperate we are in EPA. But people keep retiring, and we don't replace them. That seems to be our legacy. I'm going to first move ahead to what I'm going to talk about, and I'll go back to introduce our people. And again, I was asked to do this talk that's almost exact duplicate of what I was asked to do in September, and I was made sure of that. Sounds like at least 5 or 6 new CAB members, so at least they'll be fresh for them. So if I'm going too fast, you can stop me during the way or afterwards if I need to go back. But so I was asked in September, and Rob has done this previous occasion, kind of introduce EPA, Superfund, a lot of Superfund basics, since some of you may be new to that, how Superfund actually applies to Savannah River site as a federal facility, and then how we are involved. And this is our team. I get to introduce myself. Jennifer Tufts, one of our project managers, Deidre Lloyd, that I think they've all been at the CAB once or twice. Rob, I mentioned, and Kyle's actually been here a couple times, our community involvement leader. And this is our team. We've had anywhere from 5 to 6 project managers before, especially during the Recovery Act. But as I mentioned earlier, with people retiring and not being able to replace as many, although we are going to get some new people in this fiscal year, it's very common for us to be stretched across many sites. So where we might in the past had one person working on a site as large as Savannah River, now like Jennifer and Deidre, and I mentioned Rob and myself, we all have other sites we work on. I'm also the lead for Oak Ridge National Lab projects, Y12 projects, and, well, also Paducah, but most of my Paducah projects got postponed to the future. So one reason I was able to take on the role as acting FFA manager. And then as a team, we don't have as many people, I don't think, as South Carolina work on Savannah River, but we can reach back and get support from some of our team. In the region, we have many 3 or 4 hydros, risk assessors. These are the ones that are working primarily when we've asked them to for SRS, and I've always been covering the radiation risk for Region 4. Our attorney and our contractor, that's one of our keys, and we've been very happy and consistent with their support for us for Savannah River for many years. 2021 may be the year we either continue to get to use them or be using another contractor. That's when their contract is up. But they, as South Carolina and DWE know, they've been involved in many of our meetings and many of our field oversight. So this is going to start from really basics of EPA, so especially for those that may not be familiar with our role, this really covers hopefully as best you get. But again, if I go over these too fast, don't hesitate to ask me later if you have a question. So EPA started all the way back in 1970. Obviously, you see there where we started, but a lot of our Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, other acts like that, we actually do most of our work under. Didn't start till late 70s, early 80s. EPA, this just shows you EPA nationwide. We have 10 regions. Our 8 states in the bottom southeast. Almost every region has its own chemistry lab. We have one in Athens, Georgia. Gets heavily involved with especially a lot of our chemical sites and sampling. There are 2 radiation labs in EPA. One's in Las Vegas and one's actually in Montgomery, Alabama. Now, they don't get involved too much in the CERCLA world unless we ask them to do like split samples, for example, at certain sites. I use them more in my other role as emergency response. I'm part of the radiation emergency response team for EPA. We use them obviously a lot for training and live events like Fukushima, things like that. I did anticipate the sound on the slides. So I don't think you can turn those off, but that's our 8 states. Whoop. Is there a volume for the slides? That didn't come up on my computer, by the way. So CERCLA, there you have the actual name that we just call Superfund for short. Uh-oh, it's going to happen again. Okay. That became law in 1980, but until the amendments in 1986, we really didn't have implementation of exactly how we were going to be doing Superfund in private sites, federal facilities, either ones that we have to fund ourselves or ones that are responsible parties we can get money back from. But a lot of the sites that are part of Superfund were started becoming part of what they called the National Party List back in 1980. So a lot of times Superfund is referred to the reactive law, where we're not, sometimes we're reacting after something has happened. Some of the famous ones you see there, that was one of the reasons Superfund maybe started, and the Valley of the Drums is a perfect example where it was a very horrible drum site near Louisville, Kentucky that we thought we actually cleaned up way back in the 80s and early 90s, and then later our contractor, even as 10 years ago, found new drums in a whole new area that had not been cleaned up before. But that's kind of one of our worst case examples, but that's how Superfund maybe gotten started, to, again, abandon sites that usually private that were left with waste either in soil, sediment, groundwater, etc. And it provides authority for the federal government to respond to releases. So again, it could be something that happens like a chemical spill on a train, radiation accident, or just routine releases that have been released over the past years. So when we refer to the National Contingency Plan, that's the actual implementation guides, as we call it. 40 CFR Part 300 has a lot of that in there in the Code of Federal Regulations. Again, procedures for conducting CERCLA, response actions, and triggers that clean up action. The risk level that we use in EPA that you may have heard of, 1 in a million risk to 1 in 10,000 risk. Not everything fits under that. We'll get to some little details of that later, but that's generally the area that, in other words, we don't usually prompt something for either a removal or to address maybe a longer remedial project in Superfund unless that risk is over 1 in 10,000 risk for either a resident or an industry or recreational. This just gives you this kind of a general picture in our 8 states, how many sites there are just by the dots you see there. There's over 1,200 maybe nationwide. Region 4, because it's one of the bigger regions, we tend to have more than others, although California is the largest state by far, but Florida is pretty close to the number of Superfund sites. So it's moving ahead to how we now relate to federal facilities like Department of Energy. This was the executive order that came out in 1987. As you see, that delegate the responsibility to implement implement CERCLA to Department of Energy and all the Department of Defense facilities, makes them the lead agency. I referred to earlier when we have a Superfund site, like on a private site, that sometimes we are the lead in cleaning it up because there's no party that they can, or company that can be tied to it. But we do go through a lot of efforts if we can, even if it's a company that abandoned the site in the 40s or 50s, we can often reach back and find them, if possible, if there's a current company today. But in the federal facility world, the actual lead agency or responsible party is the federal facility themselves. So again, they must follow, as you see there, the policies, procedures spelled out in the implementation guidance. And then I'll get to this more later, but EPA either concurs with the remedies that are proposed by the lead agencies or picks another appropriate remedy, and I'll show you how that works later. So again, they're subject to the same CERCLA requirements. That's the key thing as the private entities in terms of the basic CERCLA methods, actions. For Department of Energy Facilities Region 4, you should know that all these are in our region. The only one that's been closed for over 10 years, they used to do the tritium targets at Pinellas plant in Florida. Those activities actually moved to Savannah River, and that site was closed maybe 15 years ago. So those are the three. That's why in the EPA world, Region 4 and Region 10 in Seattle, that has Idaho and Hanford are probably the two largest regions for Department of Energy facilities. And again, our Department of Defense facilities was really huge during the base closure time of the maybe mid to late 90s up until maybe almost 10 years ago, when it's not totally died out, but most of those have been addressed. Those may have been where a lot of regions got involved in federal facilities. But in terms of the largest sites, those are the Department of Energy facilities, and 3 of those are in our region. And Savannah River site itself, and this is common for almost every Department of Energy site. I don't know how many are or not, but almost all Department of Energy facilities that are NPO were put on the list either in the late 80s, early 90s. And again, it's a very common thing, whether it's Department of Defense, I think there's only one that's not, or certainly all Department of Energy facilities, to have a federal facility agreement, again, with the state, EPA, a tri-party agreement on exactly how we're going to be addressing all the sites that have potential contamination that need either address some type of remedy or no further action, et cetera. And these are the main acts that are done at federal facilities. CERCLA, obviously, is just one of them, but like most of these sites, they had a RCRA program, often that started way back in the 80s, and that's usually sometimes where the state is the lead for that. So there are already RCRA programs going on at Savannah River, I think Oak Ridge as well, and Paducah. And in fact, obviously the state still has a lot of those RCRA programs and those things they do, but CERCLA comes in to not take place of that because all of those are still applicable, but sometimes we will now address either new sites that RCRA wasn't looking at, and again, RCRA was geared toward is geared toward hazardous waste, not radionuclides per se, unless it's mixed, but even then it's really just covering the hazardous, the non-radioactive part of that. And the other acts you see there too, I might mention the Safe Drinking Water Act that most of you are familiar with. That's where we get our maximum contaminant levels. So almost every Superfund site usually has a groundwater issue, and that's where the MCLs, even though it's not a public water supply, those will be used to address, do we need to do any type of remedy for the groundwater. Again, the state is the one that classifies the water system itself, whether it be a surface water, groundwater, and then for a typical remedy, whether you're treating it or a monitored natural attenuation, but you're usually doing it based on what the MCL is for that particular contaminant. Or if it doesn't have one, you calculate one. So if any questions on that later, I can. And then the Clean Water Act and Clean Air Act as well apply in the CERCLA. So our actual FFA was signed and agreed upon August 1993. And again, that was about the same time frame that other large DOE sites were getting there. So a lot of times there are a lot of consistency, hopefully across the nation in the DOE sites. So that just lists a lot of the major ideas going on. Again, a lot of times what we're dealing with a lot is the third one, the schedules and deadlines. A lot of the times that's help not only we but DOE get money for some of these projects. We try to look at projects that are 3 years ahead. The enforceable milestones and penalties is part of that too. So, if a milestone is missed, doesn't mean it goes right to penalties, but it does mean we start negotiating or get extension if it's agreed upon a justified reason why a milestone may be missed. But it does help provide not only targets that every EPA region has to meet, whether it's a private site or a federal facility. It really justifies what we do in CERCLA at almost every Superfund site. And I'll get to later our working together, our core team. I'll have some slides on that. And again, if there's things we don't agree on, that sometimes leads to what's first is an informal dispute, which is kind of internal to our like Savannah River team, Oak Ridge team. If it gets to an impasse where we can't decide on things, then it gets elevated up to potentially our headquarters. And then our role, again, we're really oversight of the remedial actions at Savannah River, again, because Department of Energy is the lead agency. Obviously, we're trying to make sure they're adhering to the guidance of not only the NCP, CERCLA, but the actual FFA itself that we had agreed upon from '93. Technical, procedural assistance, information, guidance, training, all those things are part of our role. And then our role, again, we, along with the state, not only we concur with the selection of the remedy, the record of decision. That's for some of you that are new to CERCLA. That is really where we decide if we're a given site, if we're going to do this type of remedy for the groundwater, and it might also include something maybe for a facility or the soil. That's usually where all those decisions are made and what the criteria are that you're going to clean up to. So that's where, if you decide you're doing some kind of treatment to the groundwater, that's where you would pull in that for each of those contaminants of concern, the MCL would be normally the ones you would use to decide if you cleaned up that site or the goal to clean it up to. And get to later, our role, even after you've made a decision, every 5 years you come back to address that particular site to see if it's still, the remedy is still going as it's anticipated, or maybe it's been finished, but you're trying to make sure maybe the land use controls are still in place, that type of activity. And again, a lot of our success, I think, with Savannah River is getting involved early and often. We don't normally, I think in the early mid-'90s and the beginning of CERCLA, at almost any facility, whether DOD or DOE, was common to have maybe a DOE contractor give us a document, we would review it, and then we go back and forth. And now we realize, let's get together to scope out what we're going to do in this project. We may get some of the problems addressed ahead of the time before waiting for a document to come to us, and that's, I think, helped a lot of our working together and effective remedies, joint effective remedies happening. But again, all of these are involved in our project manager process, again, agreements between the state, EPA, and DOE. And then maybe more specifically, and I mentioned, again, our RPMs there, where we each are divided, like the state may also on different parts of the site on which projects we have. And that just kind of lists kind of the whole part of what we actually do for each of these areas, depending on what in a given year or a given couple of years, what a particular site maybe, what's going on. I'll cover a little bit more of that later. And again, once we have made maybe a decision, depending on how big the decision is, we can involve different peer review process. So every project that gets to a proposed plan or close to a record of decision in each EPA region, especially Region 4, has its own internal review process with all of our section chiefs and Superfund program, as well as our headquarters gets involved in that too, to go over what proposal you're doing, even what Department of Energy may be proposing and whether we are agreeing or disagreeing, or the state. So there's one level of that. And any remedy that may be more than $25 million for chemical, I think it's $75 million for radiation, goes before what's called a National Remedy Review, which is made up of experts across EPA's regions and labs and headquarters. And to give you an example of that, I was over at the mercury treatment project at Y12, which is a $180 million project. So it's obviously way over the $25 million. And then I had to give a presentation at that panel again, of our EPA national experts to go over every detail about that project. Again, even though DOE is the lead, they're the ones who propose it, we were concurring with it as a project manager, that would be the right thing to do, but it's still a second peer review process that lets our national experts weigh in on different parts of that. And so again, every project in EPA that's over $25 million for chemicals or $75 million for radionuclides has to go through that process. You're right, and again, one thing the headquarters is always even in that process, the state is given a chance to weigh in on whether they concur or not if they have issues with those bigger projects as well. And again, the headquarters also reviews, whether it's a private site or a federal site, every proposed plan. The proposed plan is where the public gets to see what's being proposed, what different alternatives were being looked at, what's the preferred one maybe by the lead agency, and then what one is actually chosen. So that's given the public a chance. But it's also where the headquarters weighs in on every aspect of your proposed plan and your upcoming record of decision. But one thing that's worked well, especially over the last 20 years, especially with Savannah River, is our core team process, where it's made up of the project managers of EPA, a representative of South Carolina, and a representative from DOE on each individual project, where we have a scoping meeting, sometimes have a remedial design meeting to work through a lot of the issues, again, instead of just commenting on a document, waiting to see if everyone agrees with it, and through that type of process. But this gets a lot of our any especially difficult decisions hopefully worked out along the way. I mentioned before the proposed plan that's issued to the public by Department of Energy. Again, that's where we also have to get a review from our headquarters and from our regional review team. Again, it's approved by the EPA in South Carolina. And so DOE, being the lead agency, also writes the record decision that considers any of those public comments, and again, all the core team participation as part of that as well, where then DOE signs the ROD, EPA signs the ROD, and then South Carolina signs the ROD. Again, this remedy is to ensure that, again, that we have designed and constructed according to the plan, achieve the objectives outlined in the ROD, again, protective of all the risks we've talked about for either eco or human health risk. And sometimes that involves regular monitoring to make sure the remedy is working well. And because Savannah River is so large, the 5-year remedy review, if you're not familiar with CERCLA, after you completed a record of decision, every 5 years you go review that site to make sure things are still working as they should. So again, a common Superfund site in EPA is maybe one operable unit, and let's say that project is finished, so every 5 years the state, EPA, and for example, a responsible party would go review that site and recommendations if something's not going right or if things are going great, that you move ahead. But Savannah River is so large, and maybe Hanford and other sites are like this, there's so many operable units that about 5 or 6 years ago, we realized we need to divide these up. So really we have a 5-year review nearly every year on some part of the Savannah River because of so many remedies. So we don't do one we used to do a large one every 5 years and just got too cumbersome, so now we have broken them up to do one every year. So this is just making the point that it's a 3-party decision, as again this is true for whether it's a DOD site, Department of Energy site, across any state where the South Carolina DOE and EPA. Now, per the NCP, EPA is the final, what we call signature for the record of decision. This is part of the CERCLA. But again, as I mentioned before, the teamwork approach, especially for Savannah River, has shown to work well. Again, I mentioned our core teams, where the 3 parties get together, whether it's a scoping meeting or some other aspect of the of the project, and again, design teams. There might be more special topics. Again, requires all of us to participate. We often have a facilitator that helps make sure we all get a voice and get any issues on the table, whether it be pros or cons. I think that's worked well. We have regular training for that every so often to make sure we're all agreed upon the type of approach we're doing. Again, that includes the contractors, obviously Department of Energy. Our contractors with EPA are involved in that as well. And this just goes through the whole list that you may or may not be familiar with, not to say the cab is last, or just the whole list of all the sites we work on, field oversight, 5A reviews. I think this includes almost every part of the site that's part of the circle effort. I'm going to just finish up with a little bit on the high-level waste. I won't mention too much about this. We already talked about this a little bit in the remarks earlier, but this is one of the unique things that's not true for every Department of Energy site. Obviously, only Hanford, Idaho, and Savannah River. So, like for all my projects we have at Oak Ridge, there's obviously no high-level waste tank. So it's kind of a different game for us, and it's one of those things that I think Pope was instrumental in making sure we try to get milestones, as you see in the third bullet, getting things that we can get targets on our Superfund list, as well as in our regular, that was part of our regular federal facility agreement. But because it's not like a regular cleanup of a facility, for example, or soil groundwater, this had to be worked out through what makes sense, and that's when the three parties came together to go over that, because this is where South Carolina has its regular regulation role in terms of the tanks. I think they have a slide on that coming up. So, yeah, they're the lead for the tanks up to the proposed plan in the ROD. So even though EPA is involved all along the way in the reviews and comment, but our comments actually go back to South Carolina on any documents up to the proposed plan and record decision. Again, because they have a wastewater permit with the state. It's a part of the general closure plan. So that's why this is a little bit unique, different than the rest of the way we do Superfund at the Department of Energy and other federal facility sites. And as many of you know, even Nuclear Regulatory Commission has a role, I think over the last 10 years, for the high-level waste tanks at the different sites as well. Yeah, so a proposed plan, and we call it interim ROD because it's not the final ROD until all the F and tank farms are completed. When tanks are closed or under a schedule for that, again, as you heard earlier, with the suspension agreement, we'll be come up with future milestones after the 3 years is up for the remaining tanks and the remaining F and H tank farm. And I left on the bullet because things have changed over the years. Now the salt waste processing facility, again, that was one of the projects that was originally scheduled all the way back to 2011, is now scheduled for hot ops, I think, later this year. Again, that was one of the things that may not have been foreseen back when we were projecting ahead a lot of the milestones for the tanks closures back in 2009, 2010. But obviously, with the delays and the unique facility, we've understood a lot of those technical issues. We've tried to, as we've heard earlier, work with DOE on moving our milestones out or getting other projects moved up, and that's been satisfactory to our management team. Right, I don't think I have too much more. I think that might be the last slide. And there'll be some more talks tomorrow on the ticker that you've heard about. Again, that's a technology that may be a result of Fukushima's work that we've now been able to implement successfully here. And we've toured that facility when it was before it was started. We've been very happy with that and the progress that it may make in speeding up the tanks. And again, I think that's my last statement there. Yeah, we are committed along with DOE and South Carolina to close the tanks, eliminate the threats associated with the liquid waste. So that's kind of a fast run through, but if any questions?
Yes, you.
This is Narendra Malik, CAB. Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation on EPA's role with the Savannah Riverside. I have a couple of questions. First question is, how do you determine that this facility has to go on CERCLA list?
What determines if a facility goes on the list?
Yes, on CERCLA.
It could be, I think, mostly one of two ways. For example, a state can actually put something on the national party list, and that happened a lot in the beginning, like 1980. I'll give you an example. Florida, I think, was second to California in the number of sites that General Accounting Office did a review on as late as 1999. They were on this, what I call the CERCLA list, but had not been addressed. In other words, we had not gone out to do an investigation to see if we need to make it actually on the NPL. In other words, being on the list gives it a priority, but then you have to determine if there's enough risk to go forward, what's called the hazards ranking system. Calculations done with that after some initial samples. So it turned out the GO came down hard on all the states that within EPA regions that had not been addressed. Florida was one of the largest. For federal facilities, because their facilities are so large and because a lot of them have had a lot of legacy issues of releases, especially from the 50s and 60s, there were not that many Department of Energy facilities and Department of Defense facilities that didn't have that ranking. Some were not put on the NPL for reasons, maybe the RCRA program, the case of, I think, Fernald, is it Fernald? Well, I'm sorry, more with Portsmouth, where Paducah is a gas diffusion plant. Portsmouth is also one in Ohio. Paducah is on the Superfund list. Portsmouth was not. They both are under cleanups, but one left it under RCRA program, one on Superfund. Why, I cannot say. Maybe the agreements were agreed upon with the state and that EPA region to just keep addressing under RCRA versus Superfund. So I don't know if that gets to all your answer, but the general answer is anything with a large number of past releases, which almost every Department of Energy and Department of Defense site have, they usually can meet that hazardous ranking to justify it being on the list.
Thank you. My other question is, does EPA participate with SRS in any drill for monitoring rad releases in the area?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Does EPA participate jointly with SRS in any drill for monitoring rad releases in the area?
Any monitoring?
Rad.
We don't specifically now. At one time, we had, we along with Georgia and South Carolina were taking the samples that they continue to do in and around the Savannah River to address how we're measuring things in fish, water, et cetera. Now, we stopped that program after, I think, 2 or 3 sampling events with our Montgomery lab. But in general, we don't have a lot of that going on, especially now, maybe early on in the DOE sites. I think because most DOE sites do provide the states with money to do a lot of that monitoring themselves. But we can be, if asked, we can always do any kind of splits at any given time we're asked to do that with, again, either if it's chemicals with our regional chemical lab that they've gotten involved with DOE sites in the past, including the Savannah River, or obviously if it's radionuclides, our Montgomery lab.
Okay. Doug?
Doug Howard Camp. Could you go back to slide 28, please? Okay. In looking at the third, I guess, paragraph down there, milestones exist for the remaining tank closures and tank bulk waste removal efforts, all awaiting the new contract. And mine says, on my pamphlet here, it says milestones exist for the remaining tank closures and tank bulk waste removal efforts, all in jeopardy.
Yes, that was my attempt to update the slide after I think it was already printed, because with the new contract we're waiting for, we have like a 3-year hold and then start all the remaining milestones for the tanks. That was really just a placeholder. Well, back in September, jeopardy meant we don't know what's going to happen, but now we know with the suspension agreement for this 3 years, and then after that 3 years, then the new milestones will be projected for the remainder of the tank farms.
Thank you.
Okay. Dave?
Dave Isley, Cab. John, thank you so much for that. That I've always had trouble understanding that. It was a real concise description of the record circular process. On one of your slides, one of your obligations is to determine the success of the remedies, and that gets you down to how clean is clean. Are there consensus national standards or maybe EPA standards on what is the de minimis that you want to achieve? And the second part of that would be, seems like that would be worthwhile to put those in the contracts or in the record of decision. You know, this is what you have to achieve. Can you help me out there?
Yes, for every record decision, it's, again, the three parties come together where maybe the lead agency, whether it be a private party, in this case, federal facility, this Savannah River, may propose a given alternative and a given cleanup, and then the other parties, the state and EPA, will either agree to that or propose something new. We hopefully work those out so we don't have to go to any kind of dispute. But so it's not a matter of de minimis. What usually happens in record decision for a given contaminated area, you would pull what the, I didn't use the term in here, but it's called applicable or relevant appropriate requirements. So the example I brought of the MCLs, the groundwater that are applicable for a public water supply, obviously this is not a public water supply for cleaning up, for example, A area, and it has groundwater of TCE and let's say a radionuclide at certain levels, but we can pull the MCLs that are in the Code of Federal Regulations and also the state-owned regulations, and usually it's the same number. That could be the cleanup decision. For example, TCE might be the MCL, I believe it's 5 parts per million, and let's say that if it's tritium, it's, well, let's use strontium-90 is 8 picuyers per liter. And then depending on how much contamination is in that groundwater, usually, where the lead agency would recommend this type of treatment or this type of monitoring to address that, to hopefully get it to below that MCL over a certain number of years, for example. Or if it's soil or facility, we may use the risk range to decide how much to clean up. But there's really not a de minimis level. But again, what often triggers something actually taking action is some risk for a given scenario, like for example, an industrial scenario, which has certain parameters of exposure duration, a certain time you expect the workers to be there over a certain number of years. If that triggers something that's over what we call our 10 to minus fourth risk, or 1 in 10,000 risk, for a given, for a resident it's 26 years, I believe for industrial it's 25 years, that would trigger something that we would think would require some type of record decision. So if something falls below 1 in a million risk, that's usually something that in the screening process we might go to a no further action for that site, whether something's in the soil that might be above background, but it's still below our risk, that we would call risk of concern to be addressed. But again, states can have a whole different thing, whether I think South Carolina is like Kentucky, anything that's over 1 in a million risk, they want to see something done even if it's land use controls. So we might not do some active remedy, but we may control access to the site depending on the contaminant where it is.
And all that will make that in the record decision. So whoever's doing the remedies not being surprised by, oh, wow, this isn't what we expected.
Right. And again, the proposed plan that's before that record decision gives the public a chance to weigh in whether they like it or want something else done, or et cetera.
Thank you.
Okay. Jim?
Jim Gielkap. Could you put up slide 27, please? Thank you. Looking at the list of a lot of activities going on, I'm curious, do you have a number for the full-time equivalent and people that you need to manage all of those activities?
We hope so. I think that's where every EPA region has been just would, and I think I saw this actually at one of the waste management symposia, and we've had it at some of our EPA meetings. We seem to be in the same cycle of people over the age of 50 that can retire. So we have this big bubble of people retiring, and at least in EPA, we have not been allowed to hire a lot of people over the last 10 years. In fact, at one point, it was for every 3 that left or retired, you might get 1 replacement. And currently in this administration, we haven't even been allowed to hire anyone because of all the severe budget cuts proposed until finally this year we're allowed to get a few people in to replace. So that is our main thing is so many people retiring, we've had to split people up where not maybe one person was, like Rob Pope, for example, was just doing Savannah River for many years, and then all of a sudden he was also the FFA manager at Tyndall Air Force Base. And that's Jennifer's another example where Camp Lejeune is our biggest project, but our Savannah River project is probably 20 to 30% of our time. So we are able to get a lot of projects. Sometimes they do fall behind. We've gotten behind on a lot of projects this year because of the shutdown that affected us, not DOE, and some other agencies. But even that 5 weeks can turn into more time when you lose that much time in the office and ability to get to meetings. But a lot of that we've caught up with. If we do have more time we need on a project, that's usually worked out, with our counterparts at DOE, and that's usually not a big deal. So
if you were able to get fully staffed, how many people do you think would be required?
We were certainly given plenty of money by Savannah River. We always thank them for that. And one of our accounts that they've given us over the last, I think, 8 to 10 years. Probably we are actually going to bring in one more new person that we're hoping to get involved in some Savannah River projects, maybe a few Oak Ridge. So at least one other person should be coming in this fiscal year. Maybe ideally we have another person that would help us out, but I think that will be fine for now, so we should be good.
Okay, and I assume that you get some help from DHEC in trying to cover all of these activities?
Oh, yes, and that's true for every site we have, whether it be DOD, DOE, especially the DOE sites that I work on all 3. We are very happy that the state, especially I know Tennessee and South Carolina, have a lot more staff dedicated to these DOE sites than we can. So that's obviously very helpful for us, Kentucky as well. And again, I don't think a lot of these decisions or work we could do without their help, and vice versa, hopefully. So.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions for John? Thank you, sir. So, Gil, we're running about 45 minutes fast. Do you want to take a short break and then settle in and churn through all these? We have a copy that had your signature on it, but no.
Yeah, let's go ahead and go over the IPL now, and
right,
we'll take a break before the chair recommendations, and then go through the nuclear materials recommendations. I'm going to move, if that's okay, because at this angle it's tough for Doug and me to see, and I don't know if Doug wants to move too, but okay.
You can take the mic with you.
I feel good.
At least for now. So everybody got this in their email about a week or so ago.
He's here? Okay, well, I'll sit back here. Oh, my. No, yeah. These chairs do move. Thank you. All right. We discussed this last 2 months ago in Augusta. This is our integrated priority list. Just to give you a quick, everyone received this via email from James. This was a quick little, well, it wasn't quick, but this is what I put together just as an outline. This is no way, shape, or form a final. We want to have comment, we want to have discussion, but let's just get it out there so we can be clear, since we do have some new members. This will be submitted to Mike Budney from the CAB, and it basically says the Savannah Riverside Citizens Advisory Board appreciates the opportunity to provide input to the site's prioritized activities for fiscal year 2021. As in the past, the high-level liquid waste management program remains our highest priority. This obviously can be edited, y'all. We ask that the budget requests for FY 2021 reflect the priority and be at a level that guarantees compliance with all state and federal agreements. Common infrastructure and programmatic infrastructure across the entire SRS complex desperately needs attention. We ask that infrastructure is specifically addressed down to the PBS level in all areas of the fiscal year 2021 requests. The SRS Citizen Advisory Board also places a high priority on the complete funding of payment in lieu of taxes, PILT, to Aiken County, Barnwell County, and Allendale County. In regard to environmental management mission activities, recommended priorities are as follows. Number 1, PBS 14C, radioactive liquid waste, waste stabilization, and disposition. 2, infrastructure across entire SRX complex to be addressed down to PBS levels. 3, PBS 11C. Thank you for the opportunity to submit our recommended priorities for the budget request for the Savannah River site budget for FY 2021. Hi, friend. So let's open this up for discussion. I apologize for I'm having problems seeing. I'm going to have surgery in a few days, but so I do apologize for the staccato. For those of us who don't, this is new. For those of you that we are speaking in PBS. John Lopez, can you give us a breakdown of what a PBS means?
John Lopez, DOE. Nope. Got to turn it on.
Flip the switch up towards you.
Hello.
We know that one's on.
PBS stands for Program Baseline Summary. So these are congressional control points, and I'll talk about this tomorrow. We get our money in buckets at the Savannah River site. So when Congress allocates money to the site, we get it in these buckets, and then we have very little flexibility to move around money between each bucket of money. So it is very important that when we submit our request that we have the funding aligned with the correct buckets, because we have very little opportunity to move money around between those buckets once it's been allocated to us.
Thanks. Obviously, PBS 14C deals with the radioactive liquid waste. Primarily, that is SWPF, am I correct?
Waste tanks.
Hmm?
That'd be the waste tanks.
Waste tanks.
Yeah.
Waste tanks. And what is the official 11C? I don't want to misquote it. Does anyone have that?
Nuclear materials.
It's just the nuclear materials and disposition. I didn't want to misspeak. So I know, kicking it over to strategic and legacy management, Dave, I know that this is quite shorter than what was last year. Of course, this is just an outline. I know your committee worked on this during your committee meeting. Are you comfortable with it as a committee, or what did you come up with that you would like to see different?
Sorry, everyone. AAVS is on the way. They will be here tomorrow. We won't have to worry about switching.
Dave Babaka's cab. Sorry. Well, the first thing that and I mentioned this in the executive committee meeting this morning, is the PILT, and I decided to examine this. I don't know, don't have any real strong feelings on it, but I was taking Barnwell County, just picking on them, and it had been reported that, and PILT is discretionary, by the way, but it had been reported that PILT is 14% of the county operating budget, and they have, which is $2.2 million, and then they have another $2.2 million that they have for schools. So it's $4.4 million. So they took action back in the 1950s, over 60 years ago, and the government condemned 122,000 acres for the Savannah River site, approximately, which was then 1/3 of Barnwell County's tax roll. So the federal government now continues, over 60 years later, to reimburse the county for money that it would have received in taxes. To me, it's like the gift that keeps on giving. Barnwell County doesn't any longer provide any government services to that piece of land that the federal government condemned. So a question in my mind is, why do we continue to request the PILT funding?
You know, you brought that up. That's a great question. I never thought of it that way. However, there are some reasons that to look at the counterpoint. And Joyce, you had a pretty good answer for that. Do you wish to share that? Well, yeah, you were talking.
Really? Oh, wait, there it is.
It just takes a second to catch up.
Joyce Underwood, CAB. My argument for PILT is that the land area, which I think Dave just said was 1/3 of Barnwell County, is now no longer viable to have residents on it, and as such would not be generating tax revenue for that county as well as the other counties involved that receive these payments. And that puts them at a economic disadvantage, and there is the possibility that whatever residents were living there might have, not been paying taxes because of homestead exemption or whatever, but you wouldn't really know that because they're not there anymore. I don't remember, is Ellington in Barnwell County?
It is not.
No, well, that's the one I remember that they
Dunbarton,
moved.
I believe is.
Okay. The point is, a lot of people used to live there, now they don't because it belongs to the government. So those people that would have potentially lived there do not pay taxes, and that is a disadvantage to the county overall because it's still part of their county landmass. It's not like they can take that 1/3 and get it somewhere outside of the perimeter of SRS because land is the only thing they're not making any more of, right? So I think that it would be a disservice, I suppose, to the residents there to cut 14% of their budget because I don't know how they would make up their 14% of their budget.
Yeah, Dave, I'm sorry.
Actually,
Good.
Malcolm has a question or a comment.
Just a response to that. Two comments. One, isn't this all contractual? I mean, wasn't this contractually laid out X years ago in our, or what is the contract state? A, B, in response to that, you say that X percent is now not available for revenue from taxes. Well, by the same token, X percent is not required for services. Taxes is supposed to be what services you provide, and that's how you collect your taxes and how you determine what taxes should be collected. So if you're not providing the services to that 14%, then obviously there's a reduction on that side of the coin. That's just my response. I have a question on the letter itself, though. And again, this is my first meeting, so likely I'm asking questions that everybody already knows the answers to. In your second sentence, Gil, you say, sure, as in the past, the high-level waste management requires our highest priority. Is that based on some risk assessment, or what is that based on? Just that statement. Is there a risk assessment out there where you've laid out the risk numbers, and the risk numbers say, wow, this is the greatest risk to constituents, so therefore that's what we're going to do, or what's it based on?
It's based on previous IPLs, and it's also based on the Department of Health and Environmental Control listing it as one of their number one priority, as the number one priority for the state of South Carolina.
Well, is that based on risk assessment, or is that, what is it, you know, there's got to be a reason for the basis, not just that somebody else said it was important. It's got to be a reason for it.
It is a risk assessment, not that, that's coming from from DHEC.
Okay, so there's a risk assessment, and that's a higher risk than, as an example, the hot cells, the distribution of plutonium based on a fire event in the hot cells. Which sounds we're getting into the granular that Malcolm, that we don't necessarily get into the scientific portion on the CAB. We just receive the information from Department of Energy, EPA, South Carolina DHEC, Georgia DNR, when they choose to, and then we disseminate it. We really don't critique whether it's. I guess we listen, but we're not in the position, or at least the board is not in the position to make a scientific determination on that. So our sentence there is saying basically, as South Carolina DHEC told us, this is the highest. We're just parroting back. We're not independently assessing.
No, we do not have the ability to independently assess. It has been the board's position.
Based on what?
Department of Health and Environmental Control, EPA, and DOE.
Let's get a mic for Dan.
Dan Kaminsky, CAB. It's been based on a lot of things. So presentation, our own observations, the education of this board, a lot of the lay people who aren't necessarily nuclear physicists and such. We look at it from kind of a pragmatic view that you have millions upon millions of gallons in old tanks. And when those tanks give up the ghost, that is an environmental disaster that this state does not want to see. And I think that our own personal beliefs of things that this CAB has learned over the years was sort of summarized in DHEC's statement, and it goes into their report annually that they see the tanks as the worst thing out there.
Yeah, now, I'm not questioning necessarily it. I'm just trying to understand the basis for a statement that's a pretty hard statement. This is the most severe risk that we see, and there should be a solid basis and not just an anecdotal comments or general observations, hopefully a risk assessment, hard numbers, and that's what generally things are based on that are statements like this. But anyway, I just poked.
So let's pull in some other thoughts. Narendra, you have a card up, and then Joyce.
Narendra Malik, CAB. I don't have a problem, but I do think we need to go back and see what DOE made an agreement with Barnwell County that how long we'll keep this land. And if this was agreement that we will keep this land forever and ever, and don't pay them any money, that means it's encroachment. And I think the Barnwell County socioeconomic base is part of this tax. So I think we need to go back and look into the real agreement and then decide whether they should continue to receive the money or DOE should stop it.
Let's deal with this, James, if we may, on an issue-by-issue basis. And PILT has obviously been something that's been brought up. So let's knock off an issue right now if we can.
Okay.
Let's focus on PILT. Now, when I did this letter, this mock-up, for lack of a better term, I wanted to focus the CAB into very specific integrated priority lists. So when we give this to Mike Budney, he's going to get our priorities, not a list of everything we want done, but the absolute priorities. I think, and I'm just one voice on this board, I think PILT's important. To me, I think it's important. However, it didn't rise to one of the top 3 priorities. So therefore, as I put this letter together, I didn't list it as one of the priorities, but I included it in the letter. That is my personal Now, it doesn't mean that I am right or someone else, you know, what's out there. My belief, and this is I think it's very fair for debate, my belief is that PILT is payment in lieu of taxes. If an agreement wasn't struck 60 years ago with the counties, the DOE, in my own mind, would be paying property tax on 122 acres. If that's what it is that what we said, Dave? 122? No, 122,000. Yeah, you know, I'm just, what's a couple 100,000 acres among friends? So that's my view. And now the question could be raised, and Dave, you bring up a really good point. I never thought of it that way. But I think from a CAB perspective, let's focus on that, and let's go around the table and think, is PILT something we want to include in the priority list, or is it something we don't, include in the priority letter or priority list, or not? And James, however you want to handle that, I defer.
One comment is that, we talked a little bit about the consensus process this morning in the executive committee meeting. And we want to make sure that the letter represents everybody's viewpoints. We're going to vote this up or down tomorrow. We want to make sure that we have everything covered and that everybody has a chance to make sure that they're represented here. One thing that I think can be helpful, especially when we have a contentious issue here, is to define what consensus is and what that means to you. So consensus and how we're going to do it this afternoon, especially while discussing PILT and the rest of these recommendations, is I can live with it and support it. And if you're at that stage, then let's accept it and move on. Now, if you can't live with it, if you can't support it, let's put the tent cards up. Let's talk about it, and let's make the group decisions on where we need to go. So from the folks who can't live with it and can't support it, Mike, really? Let's hear from the site manager first. If it's clicked towards you, it may just take a second to catch up. We got it. There it is.
Hey, so on PILT, this actually has its origination in a 1976 public law, 94 TAC 565. So it was designed to reimburse localities for the amount of property taxes that they wouldn't receive because the federal government had taken over the property. But I think you should consider that it is not just, you wouldn't base it just on the fact that the county no longer develops that property and therefore doesn't have it in their tax base. It's also recognition, and I'm no expert on this, but having looked at it both in DOD and DOE, it's also recognition that the work we do in that area avails itself of the public facilities and infrastructure that adjoin it, right? So our workers pass through Barnwell County to get to work, and they may avail themselves of your emergency services. They do avail themselves definitely of the roadways and all other kind of stuff as they come in and out going from work. So it's not just because you don't have that land to use for your tax base, but because we also use your facilities to get to and from work. We bring trucks in, we bring, cement mixers in, we beat up your roads, and so it is I think, part of it repayment for that. And it's also governed by DOE wide. It's not necessarily something that we directly control. There's a DOE order on it on how we go about that process. So I think of it in those terms, that it's broader than just the lack of the ability to use the land. It is really repayment for using your facilities.
Okay. Greg?
Thanks, Greg Murray, CAB. Gil, what brought this to your attention? It strikes me as something that's contractual too. We don't have any choice but to pay this.
There's been some budgets set forth by administrations that it was not included.
So does that mean we just didn't pay it? When you say some administrations, you mean at the national level, or
correct?
And we just decided not to pay it.
Well, the site, the Savannah River site's always paid PILT. It's the best of my knowledge, but it's something the site manager and his team has had to figure out how to pay. But it has not been funded in the past on a national level.
Okay, I want to follow up with another question, but Mr. Budney, of course, please go.
Yeah, so we have always paid it. In our original budget request, it didn't appear on a couple of occasions. That got fixed through the budget process, sometimes by the congressional appropriators, so it has always ended up in there. There was a request by Congress to evaluate how PILT was being administered across all of DOE because there was a perception that it wasn't done the same way in every area throughout the country. There's actually a GAO study going on in this right now. So that's kind of what precipitated it falling out of the budget a couple times, but the congressional folks made sure it got put back in every time. So.
Okay, so it's getting paid. We just want to make sure that it continues to get paid. I guess my thought on it is that maybe one way to deal with that and keep everybody happy. Looks like that second paragraph starting with common infrastructure. The next one, the PILT paragraph. Maybe if we just move those below our actual list, we could say, and other things we would like to ensure in the budget are these things, and that kind of covers, and we might actually want to put some other things in there too, to send a message to our friends that, hey, this is important to us. They're not our top 3 to 5 priorities.
Right. Thank you for following it up with the top 3 to 5. This is I'm one voice, one personal desire. I'm fine with that, but I don't want to start loading this letter down with a bunch of stuff because therefore we water down the message. So that's all I have to say about that.
Okay, thank you.
Joyce, you've had your card up for quite a while.
Underwood, Cab. Not talking in the microphone. Okay, I have questions more than comments. Is there an all-cab IPL letter? Is that what I understood you to say this morning?
This is it.
No. I mean, like, all.
According to what Doug and I heard last week in Augusta at the all-chairs meeting, DOE is creating an IPL list for DOE-EM. Now, I don't know if we'll be privy to that letter or not, but we have this is our input to that letter is this.
Did you guys talk about each site's priorities for that at the all-board meeting?
In a roundabout way,
In a roundabout way?
We do a chairs round robin. And
is this a concern for other sites?
PILT did not come up from us, and it didn't. Doug, do you remember if it came up from anyone else? No. Yeah.
Okay.
To put PILT into budgetary numbers, we're talking about less than 1%, right?
It's $6.5 million out of a $1.6 billion budget.
Right. So we're talking about a relatively small number within the budget. However, as Dave so eloquently put, it's a big number to Barnwell County.
Right. I'm not thinking specifically about PILT, but more like big picture, because like you want to have 3 to 5 in this letter. There's 16. 5 times 16 is 80. That's 80 things you're going to send to Washington, like all the sites. I was just wondering how much crossover there is between the sites of what they're going to put on their IPL, because it would send a really good message, like infrastructure, everybody, that's an issue. If that's everybody's #1 priority, then
I can tell you infrastructure. PILT did not come up, but infrastructure came up quite often with multiple sites.
I see. Okay. And thank you, Mr. Budney, for all your input there, because I was trying to understand how this PILT thing was different from eminent domain, but clearly it is, because they are using the infrastructure of the county. Looking at my notes. I think that's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
All right. Let's just keep coming up the table. Dave?
Dave Vavakas, Cab. Thinking about what you said, Mike, about the employees at the Savannah River site, and using the roads. I would think that most of those, I mean, most of the county is rural, and I would think most of the roads were within those 100,000+ acres. But I would also think that because of the site, there are a lot of SRS employees who reside in Barnwell County and pay taxes who otherwise wouldn't be living there and supporting the community with taxes and all the other things that they do. So.
There, leave that on. I'm going to hand it to Doug and let him go next.
I stole his mic.
You did. Oh, we didn't think that through, did we?
Doug Howard, Cab. James, that was my only question, was whether or not SRS is the only site that is paying PELT throughout the other sites out there. So that was the only question I had on there. But I do support it, and I think it's very well needed, I think, personally.
Well, we all know I'm not qualified to answer that question, but is anybody in the room? Mike?
PILT is paid by a number of, I don't know if it's all the sites throughout the country, but I suspect that it is. And it's paid by a lot of other federal agencies. I know DOD often pays PILT because they have big impact on, local schools and everything. Their kids are living on base but going to schools off base, that kind of stuff. So, and I understand what Dave was saying too, but there are people living in those counties that are paying taxes. But I think I wasn't around, I was around, but I wasn't involved in this in 76. I think I was graduating high school that year. So, but I suspect that was the, I'm just relating what my understanding was the background was, because they thought there was an impact beyond just the loss of property taxes to the local infrastructure that the government, the Congress decided that we ought to be authorized to make payments. It doesn't say you have to make payments, is my understanding, but it authorizes agencies to make the payments.
So let's get AK, who's been very patient, and then Dave, and then we're going to take a temperature and see where we are.
AK Hassan Cab. I just want to say regarding PELT that I support it. Obviously, Mr. Bundy has given us some explanation beyond the issue of eminent domain. Under that concept of eminent domain, it's my understanding that when the government seizes property, that those properties are supposed to be utilized for the highest and best use in the interest of the public. Even though those particular sales of property was as a result of individual sales with the government still saw fit at that time to enter into contracts that would make payments in lieu of taxes, and obviously has continued to do that to this day. And those counties, being stakeholder counties, are still expressing to us as members of the CAB that they would like those payments to continue. And as they are legitimate voices on this particular body, it seems to me most appropriate that we continue to echo those concerns and not be so much worried about how the funding comes about, but just promote the fact that our local stakeholders are asking for the funding, and they obviously are continuing to receive it.
Okay. And Dave?
Dave Isley, CAP. Going by your definition of consensus, I can support this. The 1, 2, 3 is really what is important from my perspective. First time I read this, I didn't like that statement, and the reason is you're writing a priority letter, and then it's like, oh, by the way, it just I don't even like it in there. But I'll support it as is. I'll let you make your decision.
No, that's fair. No, that's
okay.
Those are fair points.
So, Carl, we haven't heard from you, so I want to give you the opportunity.
Just real quickly, as a lifetime banker and mortgage banker in Florida, with more military bases than I could name, NASA, I wouldn't touch this. I'm surprised. I didn't know the number before it came up in the committee. but I wouldn't touch this. When you're taking property, when you're taking the use of property away, I've been involved tangentially in lawsuits, and this wouldn't even pay the legal fees. I wouldn't touch this. I'm very supportive of leaving it alone.
Okay, so let's see. Does anybody want to say that they're opposed to this, that they need it moved? They cannot support the letter without it. All right, Dave? Cannot support the letter with this in it.
Dave Lavacas, Cab. Can I make one final comment? And
Absolutely.
that is that for all of us in this room who are U.S. taxpayers, we're paying for this one way or another. So,
So is there anyone here at the table that cannot support the letter with this in it? Can I get a show of hands, just in case? I want to make sure. Yeah, Greg. Can we get a microphone?
Greg Murray, CAB. This is doing exactly what we talked about not doing this morning in the executive council meeting by putting a lot of different priorities in. Why could I possibly propose? Why don't we do a second priority to just our folks here locally, is in the form of a recommendation, and say we didn't have enough room in our IPL to do it, to include everything we thought was important, and here another. And you choose how many, or we can choose how many we would like to include, and say these are still important to us.
I acknowledge my hypocrisy.
Okay.
He's a chairperson.
All right, Joyce.
Are you proposing? Thanks.
Just delete it.
Are you proposing that we take out that sentence or that line, that paragraph?
I think it would be a compromise that would work that's consistent with what we were talking about earlier today.
This is our letter. This is not my letter, even though I sign it. I am comfortable. Obviously, I'm comfortable with it in. I wrote it, but I'm comfortable with it coming out as well.
I second that emotion.
Wait.
Greg?
Oh, Greg's emotion, not my emotion.
So Joyce has a question.
Joyce Underwood, CAB, I have a question. Is this edited after we spoke in the executive meeting where we were going to take something out because it's not going to be relevant to 2021?
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we're only talking about that one line right now.
Right. Well, what I'm saying is...
What you're talking about is from a recommendation. No.
Oh, it wasn't this.
It wasn't this.
Are you sure?
I think she's correct. I mean, because Dave was asking if we're looking. Dave asked a good question, saying, "Is this still going to be one of our priorities, sub SWPF coming online?" So, are we factoring that in? That was a fair question. I think that's what she's referring to.
Yeah, that, because Jim was looking at it in the meeting. My reason for asking is, we want to wheedle this down to as much as tiny as it can possibly be, so it's poignant. So if we got rid of that and then move PILT into 1, 2, 3, then it's not this, oh, and by the way thing. It's part of 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
See what I'm saying?
Does anyone have a problem with PILT coming out of the letter? We're asking the question if we have a problem with it being in. You have a problem with it coming out?
AK does not like it, and Bobby does not like the idea of it coming out. And Joyce is really not a fan of it coming out.
You just weren't paying attention to me, that's all.
I think we all assumed.
Okay, let's go around the table, James, and take it as an up and down.
Okay, let's just start with Brian. Yay or nay? What do you want to do? Take it out? Before we ask it.
I don't want to talk about it anymore.
Let's just do a thumbs up or a thumbs down as we go around the room. Thumbs up, we keep it. Thumbs up, it goes.
Thumbs up, thumbs down.
God almighty. I can't tell left from right either. Thumbs up, you keep it. Thumbs down, we're going to take it out. And let's just go around the table and give us a sign, Brian. Okay.
So we have abstentions. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I was out, in.
That's fine, but we're only talking about the letter. We're not getting into the IPL. We can bring it back. We can bring it back. I'm abstaining.
You wiggling?
I'm abstaining.
Let me recount that one. Will you put the people who are thumbs up, will you put your thumb back up, please, and let me count it again.
What?
They all changed their vote.
Thumbs up is leaving it in, is that correct?
I'm abstaining.
Thumbs up.
So that was 11. So
How many
the board is evenly divided between,
So how many people do we have here?
yeah, 22 people.
So I abstained. Did you count me? I didn't vote.
So the abstentions, the keep it in was 11, so that was the majority. The others were abstain or take it out. That was the other 11. Right?
We'll leave it in because I voted. I changed my vote to up.
Okay. So we're going to leave it in for now.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have a problem with what Greg said. Drop it, but I mean, whatever. Sometimes we wordsmith this stuff just to
wordsmith it.
to the nth degree. Okay, let's go down to the actual list. Number 1, number 2, number 3, and herein lies one. Nuclear materials, strategic and legacy management, waste management, facilities committees. I put 3. I like the fact, my hypocrisy, whatever, being a limited number. Last year, we went to like 8 or 9 with like 3 or 4 sub priorities. I felt like that. So if I'm DOE and I receive 11 different things, what's really a priority? I would like to see us this year make this the actual IPL, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, no more than 5, but 3 to 4 things. So when Mike Budney receives this, he's going to say, okay, I know exactly what their priority is, not a ton of information. So with that being said, and with what Malcolm clearly asked about with PBS 14C, are we good with that still being our number 1 priority? Radioactive liquid tank waste, stabilization and disposition. Is that still this board's number 1 priority for Savannah River Site and its funding?
A head nod, some indication.
Does anyone think it's not? Maybe that's a better question. Does anyone think, okay, Dave.
Go for it.
Cab. As I said when I did the committee update for strategic and legacy management, I said we felt strongly that liquid waste stabilization and disposition, PBS 14C, should remain the number 1 priority. But then after I started looking at this and hearing some things subsequent to that meeting that the SWPF was going to be commissioned in FY20 late first quarter, early second quarter, and this is an FY21 letter, budget letter. Do we still need to make this the number 1 priority in FY21? So.
My question, I mean, that's a good question, and it's something, again, I appreciate you making me think about things I don't think that way normally. What does that do to affect SDU construction? Because one of the things I've been worried about, we have SDU 6 finished, SDU 7 is up and going. If we don't list this as one of our top priorities, is that going to limit the CAB's view of SDU? Because if SDU 8, 9 isn't produced, SPWPF can rock out all those gallons every year, and there won't be a place to go.
John, correct me if I'm wrong, but independent budget line items.
Are they? Is that an independent line item?
John Lopez. Yes, they are all under PBS 14C, but the SDUs are line item projects underneath 14C. So they're their own congressional control point underneath 14C. So it's all one big project with individual line items underneath it.
Okay.
So listing it all here as one priority, I think that would include the SDU construction because they're all included as part of 14C.
Okay.
So let me ask. Gil, you asked a minute ago, do people feel like this is the number 1? A lot of people seem to think that. But is there anything missing from this list? let me ask that. I mean, I really, we need to establish, or these are three before we tackle the order. Is something missing? Jim, do you feel like something's missing?
Jim Gielkamp. Not so much missing, but we have this PBS 11C, which has got a whole bunch of stuff in it that I don't think you really want in the priority list. I don't know that we need to put in workforce sustainment, support for foreign research reactors, things like that. I don't know what 11C is really trying to say.
Does anyone have any feedback for Jim?
11C maintains nuclear materials. There's a lot of things in the PBS, Jim, that that we are making a priority to the site manager and saying nuclear materials is one of our top 3 priorities at this point in the creation of this letter.
Then my point would be, why don't we just say that? Let's get rid of this slavery to the budget constraint numbers.
Okay.
And if nuclear materials is the priority, then say nuclear materials.
I'm okay with that.
Could apply the same thing to 14C. I don't see where it adds any value to the letter.
I'm good with that.
So how do you want to write it? You just want to take off the PBS 11C and write nuclear materials program? What do you want to do?
Right. I mean, liquid material. Yeah, and that's where I was going already. Nuclear materials in number 3, strike out PBS 11C, and that's where I was going along Jim's thought process there. With number 1, we could say the liquid waste program.
Okay, so get rid of PBS 14C, comma. And you can leave the rest of it.
Well, at this point, well, it doesn't matter.
So, yeah, that'll work.
It's fine. I can't. I mean, I'm good.
Just do liquid waste program or anything like that. Nobody.
To that level.
Okay.
Does anyone have a problem with those changes? I mean, certainly, you know, Mike in his office know what liquid waste program falls and what PBC.
You know what that is, right?
PBS.
You familiar with the liquid waste program?
I'm vaguely familiar with the liquid waste program. So if we're going to change this, I already had this question waiting. Number 2, you said infrastructure across the entire complex. Now, we have 2 types of infrastructure at the site. And maybe you're talking about all of it, or maybe you mean one or the other. There's common infrastructure, and there's program infrastructure. So the liquid waste program has infrastructure it's responsible for. The nuclear materials program has infrastructure it's responsible for, like H Canyon. Common infrastructure, the roads, the water system, the sewer system, that kind of stuff, is funded differently.
When I put this together, I meant all infrastructure. So common and what was the other one? Program. So yeah, that was my intent to say down to PBS levels, but I didn't speak in the right language. So infrastructure across.
It ought to say common and program.
So,
that's
yeah,
okay.
We'll just start it off with.
If you want to refer to everything.
That's how I wanted it to be said.
Number 2, start off with common and program infrastructure. Joyce, you've been patient.
Joyce Underwood, cab. Sorry about that. I like this a lot. You guys did a lot of stuff I was going to suggest anyway. I have a question now. Is there any benefit to making these complete sentences? Nuclear waste program what?
These are bullet points.
These are bullet points. Okay. And with regard to the infrastructure, back to the PILT thing, since we voted to keep it in, basically that's why we want to keep PILT, as Mr. Budney said, because taking trucks over roads damages roads. I learned that from Dan at a committee meeting a long time ago. So if we're taking all this heavy stuff over the roads, we're messing up their roads, and now we're going to fund the infrastructure for inside the perimeter. We should fund the infrastructure for outside of the perimeter, because eventually the roads will fall apart, right?
Don't go there.
Don't go there.
Don't go there.
We don't want to phrase it in quite those terms.
Well,
yeah, trust me, Doug. Please, Doug and I beg you, don't go there.
I'm sorry.
We just had a conversation with Nevada about that very thing. So
Well, my point is you could piggyback it. That's why you want to fund PILT, because it's integral to the functioning of the infrastructure.
I'm gonna stay quiet on that.
Anyway, so here we are. We're keeping PILT in. That's what the majority of the group wanted. We've simplified the ways that we wrote those. We need to decide, are we kind of spinning wheels, or are we at a good point with this? Do we feel good about moving on with this? Or is something missing, or is there too much in here that we need to deal with? That's the question that we need to answer.
Okay, let's do this, James.
Yeah.
Dave is the Vice Chair of Strategic and Legacy Management. Is there anything that your committee would like to be added or withdrawn?
Dave Vavagas, Cab. No, I think we're good.
Okay. Waste Management, Narinder, excuse me?
He's over there.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I wasn't going to look at him.
Oh.
Narinder, how do you feel about this, and how's your committee feel?
Narendra Malak, I think I'm good.
Okay. Facilities, you're good? I'd ask A&O, but does A&O have any input on this? No. And nuclear materials, Mr. Hill?
Charles Hilton, Cab. I'm pretty comfortable with it. Would you roll back 2 paragraphs, I believe? Right there. I'm still struggling with item number 2. Why do we need the second paragraph, common infrastructure and programmatic infrastructure across? We're trying to shorten this thing and really make it point on. So why are we saying, why don't we eliminate that whole paragraph?
You okay with that, Gil?
I'm fine with it, because we hit it in the name. I mean, it is redundant.
Everyone else okay with that? Just give me a quick head nod, yes or no. Yep. Okay. Yeah. So that entire paragraph on common infrastructure is going to come out. Yep. I know. That's one of those terrifying moments of, do they really mean it?
Doug, do you have anything?
Okay. All right.
All right. Do we need to reread it, or just go ahead, James? Your call.
I just want to make sure everybody's happy with this. Greg has a last comment. Joyce, will you hand him your microphone? Oh, no, Narendra's
got it.
Greg Murray Cab, thank you. Are our DOE friends clear that is this specific enough, or do y'all feel like you understand what we're saying here? Okay, thank you.
All right. So tomorrow, we're not going to wordsmith this anymore. If we do need to discuss it, we can take a moment or two to do that, but we're going to vote on it tomorrow, on this product as is. Everybody okay with that? Everybody know what you want to do with this, how you intend to vote? Okay.
No, we do the votes tomorrow. All right.
So,
thank you very much.
That was one. Gil, you mentioned maybe taking a break after this one and then getting back into it.
Sure. What time is public comments?
It's like 4:45. Yeah, we got a while before public comment. So let's
Okay.
take 10.
There you go.
4 o'clock, please. Everybody be back in your seats at 4 o'clock. Let's grab our seats, everyone. Gil. 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 You ready? It's going to be real awkward talking chairs recommendations without the chair. All right, folks. Thank you. Thank you for trying to keep it short. I do appreciate it. I know that everybody is eager to see the end of today because there is delicious food waiting for everybody, I'm sure. I heard that there's a place that sells crawfish beignets, and that just might be my jam. It sounds really good. So, Gil, let's start with chair's recommendation number 1. And I know that you're going to hit it, but I'm going to remind everybody this is not something we're going to wordsmith. Chair's recommendations come from all chairs. They've already done all the wordsmithing that they need to do. We can talk substance. We can debate whether or not this board should support it. We'll vote on that tomorrow, but one thing we will not do is change so much as a comma in this document. I don't care if it's out of place. I don't care if it's a run-on sentence. I don't care if it's grammatically incorrect. Don't raise your card for wordsmithing purposes. Okay? Gil, let's talk about recommendation number 1, EM's review of cleanup milestones.
This was brought to us by the chairman of the Hanford Board and the chairman of the Oak Ridge Board. And they say on February 14th, 2019, the U.S. Government Accountability Office, the GAO, published DOE should take actions to improve oversight of cleanup milestones. The report found that DOE did not accurately track or report whether milestones were met, missed, or postponed. It also found that sites continually renegotiate milestones they are at risk of missing. GAO recommended the U.S. Department of Environmental Management should update its policies and procedures to establish a standard definition of milestones, track original milestone dates, as well as changes to its cleanup milestones, report annually to Congress on the status of its cleanup milestones, and conduct root cause analysis of missed or postponed milestones. One of the ways that the local boards that make up the Environmental Management Site-Specific Advisory Board, EMSSAB, become informed about cleanup actions at their site is tracking cleanup milestones. Milestone achievement, delays, and change information should be shared with the local boards on a regular basis. Recommendations. The EMSSAB chairs recommend EM create a complex-wide, consistently applied data dictionary for milestone terminology. The inconsistency in not applying the same criteria in DOE tracking of milestones results in confusion for the local boards and the EMSSAB chairs as they meet to discuss cleanup issues and contemplate recommendations. 2, local boards and public should be able to access site-specific milestone information in a timely manner. Milestone information should contain the rationale for identifying the type based on the data dictionary of milestones and detailed information about why a milestone will be advanced, delayed, or postponed. This is the recommendation that was brought forward, and at this point we can discuss it, and Doug and I will do our best to answer any questions that you may have. Do we have any questions, any discussion?
Greg Murray, Cab. This sounds very reasonable to me. Can you guys, Gil or Doug, characterize sort of the discussion? Was this controversial in any way? Were there any things that people felt strongly about that got excluded? I guess I'm thinking in terms of there's something we should do locally as well to support this even more.
Doug Howard Cap. Well, this was something that came out of the, as Gil alluded to in reading, the GAO accountability, that published, which spelled out actions that should improve oversight of cleanup milestones. So it was something that we were all in agreement to, because it was something we all feel that should be very transparent to all of us, and something that needs to be done.
Were there any controversial points or anything that was left out that some people would have liked to have had in it, or anything like that? I mean, did they just plop it down on the table and y'all talk about it for 5 minutes and it was done?
Well, it wasn't that easy, but I think the consensus was that everybody agreed to it, because in reading, if you read the GAO report, I think we all saw that this was something that we needed to all come to agreement on. Yeah, there was some debate on it, but all I can remember is the fact that everybody came to an agreement at the end.
And our edition, Doug and my edition, we had a member of the CAB previously who used to ask this question of the site manager every single meeting about milestones and things. So this really, for our board, wasn't that big a deal, because we get this information regularly. So neither Doug nor I, we weren't vocally for it or vocally against it. We were just okay with it.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Dave?
Vivakis Cab. Gil, you talked earlier about this, what you talked about in the EMSSAB meeting about the end state planning for contracts. How does this recommendation dovetail, or maybe mesh is a better word, with the end state planning for contracts?
This is my opinion, and my opinion only. I don't think it does. I think this is a recommendation that is all chairs want to put through with the current structure of contracting. This is the end state thing. The end state is something that's coming. It's not here yet. So in lieu of that, which will have more transparency, the end state contracting, my understanding, will have more transparency. This is a way for other sites to get more information with the danger. I mean, all the chairs from around the country are diligent and very engaged. However, I think that this board, y'all are a little bit different in asking questions. I think I'm proud of this board, and I think we get that information from Department of Energy on a fairly regular basis. I'm not sure from the discussion around the table last week, I'm not sure that all the other sites get this information as readily available. Now, I don't know if they ask. I know there's some cabs that don't meet as often, so the information isn't coming to them as often. So I don't really think this bears much impact on Savannah River Site Citizens Advisory Board. However, I think it bears more impact for some of the other sites around the and I'm okay with it. I mean, I guess that's the way to answer that question. Dave?
All right. Jim?
Jim Gielkamp. Was there any discussion or thought given to a standardized process for establishing milestones, or was this just a discussion of the reporting and the frequency of reporting?
Doug Howard Cap. Both Mark Gilbertson and Jeff Griffin, they both talked about having a consistency in milestones throughout all the sites, and ensuring that everybody from each site had the ability to look at those milestones at those other sites.
Okay. Any other questions? Everybody knows what they want to do with this tomorrow? Gil? No? So, homework. Read over this. If you're really interested in the discussion that the chairs had, we did show off at the chairs meeting. We live streamed it. So if you go to YouTube and search for SRS Cab, you'll find the recording. Just skip towards the later part of the afternoon on May 8th, and you'll be able to see exactly how the discussion went. You can judge it for yourself. Any questions? All right. You ready for number 2?
Yeah, before we move on to number 2,
okay.
I know that I didn't read this part, but the all chairs decided to put an addendum onto every recommendation that comes out of that committee or that board of who we are. This is exact verbiage from a recommendation that was sent, I believe it was passed.
2016.
From 2016 in a previous Augusta meeting, where the board got together basically and said they wanted to restate exactly who they are, because there seems to be some confusion that when leadership changes in Washington on the EM level, in the secretary level, they may not understand who the site-specific advisory boards are. So this is something that the board agreed to add on to every recommendation. You can read that at your leisure. It's not something I'm going to read out loud every time. So, but moving on to the second recommendation that came from the all-chair meeting, improving environmental management science and technology program. The EM Site-Specific Advisory Board chairs wish to respond to the National Academies of Science report, Independent Assessment of Science and Technology for the Department of Energy's Defense Environmental Cleanup Program, which assesses the success of the EM Science and Technology Program, a program that defines needs for near-term and out-year cleanup of radioactive material. As advisory boards to the DOE-EM, the SSAB chairs collectively seek a continued EM focus on permanent reduction of risk to future human generations and the environment. The SSAB chairs agree to the need for a formal, open, transparent, quantifiable, and integrated science and technology program that is accessible by everyone, science, regulators, and the public. We also agree on the need for an aggressive, cohesive science and technology program that can verify the success of selected remediation pathways by utilizing hard data in defense of chosen risk-informed cleanup decisions. We also see the need for a data-rich, user-friendly, and publicly accessible digital platform that is easily accessed and navigated by everyone. Recommendations. The SSAB chairs support the development of programmatically integrated under one identified EM government program, robust science and technology effort that is fully funded in order to A, identify and pursue development of the technologies necessary to successfully achieve risk-based reduction of radiological and other hazardous waste materials, B, to integrate decisions that are common between sites with similar remediation needs, and C, identify scientific challenges common to sites. Deferring cleanup to the future by relying on the myth that there will be more money or other cheaper remediation solutions has never driven down costs of remediation to date. 2, a portion of the technology development effort for DOE-EM cleanup program should focus on breakthrough solutions and technologies that can substantially reduce cleanup costs, schedules, and uncertainties as stated in the NAS report. The SSAB chairs recommend exploring already developed, usable computer platforms to see if they are flexible enough to systemize verification of best practice decisions. At Hanford Nuclear Reservation, the Phoenix computer platform has been in development, both the Richland side of the site, soil and groundwater remediation, and for the Office of River Protection in support of the safe configuration of the tank farms and building of the waste treatment plant. In development for 8 years now, the Phoenix platform is a data-rich base of maps, waste definition, characterization, data, and more. We wonder if a platform such as this one might not be adapted as a solution programmatically to address the needs and define science and technology's needs and validate decisions. It is clear that this piecemeal, undocumented, scattered S&T efforts to date have not served EM well, leaving the DOE EM department potentially destined to not be able to identify common remediation needs from site to site, or worse, repeat testing of already pursued technologies that could not reach maturity. The chairs recommend EM explore the path of working with the Advanced Research Projects Agency Energy Office, coupled with public outreach and transparency to implement a directional shift towards better control. The culture and process of contracting must be changed. The reins of scientific need and technology development should reside in a government-identified and controlled structures of discipline that manages budgetary resources, delivery time expectations, and mission scope. ARPA-E might be the solution to manage a breakthrough science and technology development program for EM. ARPA focuses on technologies too early for private sector investment. ARPA awardees are unique because they are developing entirely new ways to generate, store, and use energy. Questions or comments?
Anything, anybody? Greg?
Yeah. Greg Murray, CAB. Can y'all, I'm not clear exactly what they're doing here. Can you tell, is this like just, it's a database? Is that what, or a data clearinghouse, or what is this thing?
It is what it says it is.
If I might ask Mr. Budney a question. Mr. Budney, if you had this, what would you do with this?
Send it to headquarters.
We have well-defined pathways already for our cleanup, so I don't really know what this is all about. We have the benefit of having the lab on the site, and they've developed a great program that solved how we, and then working with our regulars at DHEC and EPA, we've solved what the path forward is for liquid waste. We know what the end game looks like now, and what we got to do to get a tank closed. So, and as you know, our lab is mostly we're applying. It's applied science lab, not basic R&D like ARPA-E might be doing. So we're not really looking for much basic science work to do what we have to do today. Okay. There could be some stuff maybe associated with H Canyon or something in the future, but that's not necessarily cleanup. That's a different mission we have.
Okay, thanks.
Doug?
Doug Howard Camp. Greg, I think also what they were trying to do was to bring a standardized database that each site could look at the other sites to kind of see what they're doing in the science and technology arena, to see if it's something that they could use on their sites to kind of improve what they're doing. They wanted something where everybody could take a look at throughout the environmental management sites and areas to see what it is that they're doing out there that they might be able to use on their sites to make things go a little bit better.
Craig, I'm going to ask you to pass your microphone down to Dave, and while it's making its way, Joyce, go ahead and make your comment or ask your question.
Joyce Underwood, CAB. When I read it, I agree with what Doug said. I think that it's kind of like supposed to standardize what's going on across the complex, but my question is, why is it not already standardized? Is it already standardized? Is it necessary to do something like this? Anybody?
I don't think anybody wants to touch that.
Well, the fact that nobody wants to touch that, maybe you all ought to think about that.
So let's.
Hey, Joyce, Doug Howard Cat. It's not. I think some sites have it, but not all have it where they can they can look at what other sites are doing out there. I mean, this is something that everybody felt is needed. You know, some kind of database where all the sites could kind of be on, I guess, a level that they can see what others are doing to improve things on their sites, you know.
I think that's useful and valid, and that's my 2 cents.
So let's go to Dave and then Carlos.
Dave Isley, Cab. I'm reading this thing going, I will say my eyes were glazing over as you were reading that thing.
Yours too?
But I mean, to me it's pablum. The only question I have, and I guess this is for Michael to answer, does this recommendation put SRS in a bind in any way?
I defer to my AMs, but I don't think so. I don't know if anything restricts us, right?
One of them.
Let's just move this one. We're going to take this one off the table. Stop pretending like it works.
Okay, Jim Folk, DOE. Yeah, just maybe in response to some of the questions, and again, I didn't write the recommendation, so just two thoughts come to mind, though, that may apply in our case. And one might be ticker. Okay, we've talked before about ion exchange, how you could use that for season removal. There may be other applications where, you know, and don't forget, Hanford is right behind us on that technology, right? So there could be other applications out there. That's kind of one where I would see something like this might apply. The other thing might be, for instance, the CAB has been briefed before on mercury in different situations within the liquid waste program, the desire to remove that mercury, how we could do that. So that's, and by the way, mercury is funded by the technology development program out of headquarters, which is, I think, where, for instance, under item 2, when it talks about that technology development effort. So that's where I would make that connection. Oak Ridge has a lot of work that they're doing on mercury removal as well. So I think, as I read it, I think that's where this thing is trying to go, where so that maybe $1 can go a little bit further. Technology development program in total is very competitive as far as how much money is out there. It's a rather small amount of money. It's kind of prioritized across the sites. So that's where I could see this having some application. But no, I would not see it as a restriction or an impact, negative impact to us. Hopefully it would create a database that we could all be able to use.
Okay.
Thank you, Eddie.
All right, Carlos?
Carlos Cato, CAB. I guess this question will be directed towards our chairs. So we mentioned the platform existing at Hanford. How much background do we have on the scope of this type of project, and what would it cost?
That wasn't discussed. Without me, I was going to make a joke, but it's not a good one. I was going to say Hanford doesn't worry about money, the cost was not discussed. One of the things, and we spoke about it earlier. I didn't speak about it in chair update with the full board, but I did speak about it this morning with the executive committee. One of the things that became abundantly clear during these last 3 days, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, when Doug and I were meeting with all these other sites, is that Savannah River is different than the other EM sites around the country, with limited difference. Los Alamos kind of falls under. We have enduring mission going on at Savannah River site. So when Mark Gilbertson spoke, he talked about cleanup and end state and closing sites and all these things. And so and that really never hammered home to me, and this is the third or fourth one I've attended. And I was on a tour of DWPF, and there was someone from Paducah, and we were being explained how DWPF works and things, and the person from Paducah is like, "Oh, so you actually do stuff here. You don't just clean stuff up and close it down." So some of the things when we talk about this technology, and wanting to build a database, this one was sponsored by Hanford, and Hanford basically they're bringing all this information together so it can be streamlined and, in theory, be cost effective. Not all these recommendations that really fit with us specifically. Can we help? Absolutely. Do we have environmental management cleanup? Do we have liquid tanks cleanup? Do we have a lot of the things that other sites have? Absolutely. But when we start talking, we start comparing apples to apples. We're not always comparing apples to apples when it comes to Savannah River Site and Hanford or Oak Ridge or some other sites, because we have other things going on. I don't know if I'm really addressing your question, but what the thought process here is helping. One of the things that EM1 and White has tasked the All Chairs Board with is working together to get solutions. And I think this is an attempt by the author of this recommendation to help us partner together so we can all have the same information. Sometimes with us it gets a little confusing because we're not solely, we are focused as a CAB on cleanup, but we are not, as I'm learning, nearly as focused as a Paducah, a Portsmouth, Oak Ridge. They are really, really, really focused on cleaning up and returning that earth back to the way it was. We do have an end date of 2067, 65 off the top of my head. But really for us, in my opinion, that's a theoretical thing. When we're talking to these other sites, they're really looking for an end date. And is it Portsmouth? They want to close in 5 to 10 years and be done. So this is about helping everybody, Carlos. I don't know if I totally agree with it, but I know I don't totally disagree with it. So the thought process behind this is cost-saving measures.
Let's get Doug and then Carl.
Doug Howard, Cap. Cato, I think the real question is not how much it's going to cost, but how much money is it going to save. This deficiency was brought out during a report that the Advanced Research Projects Agency /Energy brought out. It was one of the deficiencies they saw throughout the environmental management department that needed to be done. So this is something that they did a lot of research and in bringing out some of the problems that they're looking at the environmental management department having right now, and something that could help everybody around. So I think really the question needs to be is how much money this will save if they have something like this.
Carl?
Just trying to, Carl Steen, CAB, just trying to draw a parallel. I sat on a board for 6 or 7 years, Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute, and we routinely shared with like Woods Hole or Scripps Oceanographic, unless if it were proprietary or funded by a pharmaceutical and patentable or owned, then there wouldn't be necessarily sharing. But a lot of what we did was funded by the Defense Department and other things. But it was open to sharing unless there were these barriers. And I would view everything that's done here, if it's more government paid for, it's open to other government agencies with similar problems. And that's just my assumption. I may be wrong, but we were quite open unless it was a patented process or or owned by a pharmaceutical.
All right, Joyce, last comment.
Joyce Underwood, Cab. You're so funny. You think I have a comment? I have a question.
Either way.
He said the word proprietary. Don't we do stuff like that? Would that be involved in this? We have patents and proprietary whatnot at the national lab, correct? Does that fall under this?
I don't know that it would.
Bueller? So would that be, I guess you wouldn't know, but is that what they're asking for here too? Do you know?
Not necessarily. I'd say
Not
that
necessarily?
it's really, yeah, it's more the idea sharing type of thing than it is, you know, let's put patents in a database type of stuff.
Okay.
And even if some of it did get in there, I mean, it's patented. The contractors wanting to use it in other places would have to pay to use that patent. Half the time while you patent stuff. All right. Everybody knows what they want to do with this tomorrow. No questions? Okay. So again, homework, read over this again. If you'd like to take a look at the video, see the discussion, which I think might have been shorter than today's, by just a little bit. Yeah, feel free to watch the discussion online. It's youtube.com, search for SRS Cab. It'll be there May 8th, later part of the afternoon, okay? So let's move into our recommendations. We've got 2 of those that we need to get through before we can call it a day. Charles, these are nuclear materials recommendations, correct? Let's start with 235F, if you will.
Charles Hilton, Cab. I'm not going to read this entire recommendation to you. At our last meeting, we had numerous presentations on building 235F. Just to refresh your memory quickly, 235F made the plutonium-238 fuel pellets for the space program as well as other things. When the building was closed up, it was literally walked away from, and there was a lot of contamination left in the work cells. Because of a decision made several years ago by the Defense Nuclear Facilities Safety Board, that nuclear material has to be removed to a safe, quote-unquote, level. And at that time, the building will be deactivated and sit there for probably 20 years to the entire F Canyon area is demobilized and decommissioned. DOE has asked for an opinion from us. Is that the best path forward, or should we go ahead and clear this facility and close it down permanently and be done with it? The options are, number 1, to continue the current path, maintain the building for 20 years and deactivate. I'm not going to read number 2 completely, but it simply says to alter the current plan and seek regulatory approval to decommission the building basically as quickly as possible, which we estimate to be 2026. The recommendation from the Nuclear Materials Committee is, and I'm going to read this verbatim, the Citizens Advisory Board recommends that the Department of Energy, number 1, accelerate the timeline for decommissioning 235F with a targeted completion date of 2026, and number 2, initiate the preparation of required regulatory documents in parallel with the deactivation process. These documents may include the preparation of an engineering evaluation cost analysis, remedial investigation for remedial actions, interim ROD feasibility studies for decommissioning design, interim ROD start decommissioning implementation plans and budgets, and B, parallel preparations of the required regulatory documentation will help complete the decommissioning of the facility a number of years ahead of the proposed FFA schedule and offer what is considered the most cost-effective option. We see this as a way that we can finish this project in the next 6 years in today's dollars. Plus, it gets rid of a potential threat to the environment, both to the workers at SRS as well as the citizens in the neighboring areas. So we ask that the full board consider this and take appropriate action.
All right, folks. So let's do this in a couple different ways. Let's start off with just questions for understanding. Malcolm? Well, if you've got something. Nobody else seems to have anything else. I don't see any cards.
But the first understanding I have is in the first option, I don't understand the 20 years. In other words, the first option one that they apparently are pursuing now is continue the current path and maintain the building for 20 years and then deactivate and decommission. 20, a delay in time generally means you're waiting for decay. But plutonium ain't going to decay. And the 20 years is nothing. So what's the basis for 20 years delay in the option?
Funding.
Oh, it's a funding. Oh, so it's a funding-driven issue. Okay. So it's straight funding-driven. Okay, I understand that then. With regard to what's proposed here, man, I think it's awesome. This is a catastrophe waiting to happen. A fire-induced plutonium spread is not good, and to accelerate anything to get to clean it up more quickly, man, that's good stuff.
Let me make one comment about what you just said. We have taken significant efforts to ensure that there will be no fire in this facility. We have taken all kinds of material out of there, including electric sources, to ensure that. And that will actually answer the DNFSB's safety concern, the recommendation. So at that point, we'll clear that concern. So it's not a fire issue at that point, and that'll be done relatively soon, within the next year or so. And then the question is that entombing the 238 that remains. There we have to get down to a level, because it does declare, this is plutonium 238, 87-year half-life. So compared to other types of plutonium, it's pretty short. And so it decays down to, through radium to lead. We got to get the amount low enough that you won't have a concern with lead getting into the water, even after we entomb it and grout. So that's the standard we have to get down to. And we're running an analysis now to figure out how much that is. We got to get down so we can work with the state to determine that we've done enough to meet the requirements some long time into the future.
So after you go in and you've given the fire issue, I assume you would require the Penny Charter to CFR Part 50? Penny Charter to CFR Part 50, which is the fire issue for nuclear power plants. And that is something that...
I'm not positive on that because we're not a nuclear power plant.
But 10 CFR Part 50 is all about fire in facilities. So if
there's a CFR that we're responsible to be complying with, you bet we are.
Gil.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that particular one. Okay.
I think, Malcolm, one of the issues maybe here is that it's been kind of unfair. Well, I was going to say throw you into the fire, bad choice of words. But we 2 months ago at this meeting, we had an extensive board panel discussion where these questions would have been great. And so going back and possibly seeing those presentations may help understand it a little bit. You understand this stuff clearly at a level that I think I can speak for most of us, we don't. But when, with the recommendations coming forward, I think it'll make more sense to you tomorrow when you see the information that's presented to us, and then how we actually create and do the recommendations from there.
Just to be clear, with regard to this recommendation, my take was this is solid stuff.
Great.
That was my bottom line with it. It reduces risk to a fairly significant event, potential event that a risk assessment would blow this all over the place in numbers.
So let's do this.
And I would like to note that Michael McLean has finally returned to the room after all the hard questions on his program.
We'll make sure that that's in the minutes. So Let's do this. Who doesn't share Malcolm's viewpoint? Who does not feel that this is solid? Well, I don't think that we need lots of voices of support here. If we can just find the dissents and identify things that need to change in the document. Is everyone good with it as is? Yes? No changes that we need to make? Let's move on to the next one then. Dave, I believe this one is yours. H Canyon and L Basin spent nuclear fuel. Or H Canyon future operations. That's what we want.
Yes, sir, it is.
Now, I'm going to go ahead and warn you. We are coming right up on our public comment time, and it is a hard break that we're going to take. So you're going to get to talk for about 3 minutes, and then I'm going to interrupt you.
You do whatever you need to do.
Can you tell my missus that? Never mind. Continue on.
If you go look at the document or the references, you'll see that this recommendation is in response to a request by DOE. It's the annual work plan. And to start that process off, one of the briefings we had at the last CAB, again, very extensive, had to do with H Canyon and L area. And some proposals that were on the table of various options of closing down the canyon early and investigating dry storage of the fuel in some other place. Now, I will tell you, I've worked out at the site 30 plus years, and about half of my life spent on this particular program. So when I heard that, I just said, I am writing a recommendation. And I think it's pretty clear reading the document that I am not in favor of shutting the canyon down until it's complete. And the reasons for that are all in the documentation. I was quite pleased when I presented it to Nuclear Materials Committee. First of all, we got a unanimous pro vote, and there were very little technical comments. There was some editorial stuff. You're always going to get that. So I was very pleased with that, because when something's written clearly, you don't get a lot of comment on the technical content. So I'm going to do as Charles did, and you can read the content, and I'll go right to the recommendations. The SRS CAB recommends that DOE SR operate the H Canyon at full capability and capacity until all SNF, that's spent nuclear fuel, in the SRS inventory is dissolved and properly disposed of. Pursue new technologies to dissolve non-aluminum clad spent nuclear fuel in anticipation that such material has no other reliable disposition path. And for some of the new members or people that don't understand the distinction between non-aluminum clad, the canyon has the capability of dissolving aluminum at this time. There is some question whether it can dissolve the non-aluminum, such as zirconium and stainless steel. And if, you know, I'll talk to anybody offline that wants to talk about that, or you can ask Mike Michelanis. He'll be glad to answer that question.
So let's take a pause. We're at 4:45.
I did it in 3 minutes.
Outstanding, sir. We don't have anybody signed up for a public comment. Is there anybody from the public who would like to make a comment? Nope. Going once, going twice? All right. So back to the recommendation. Are there any clarifying questions that anyone has, or any dissents that need to be addressed, changes that need to be made? What do we need to do with this to be successful today? Malcolm, you got some questions.
Whoops.
Nope, not anymore.
I do, but I don't want to. I'll let answer after other people do.
Okay. Anybody else? Dave?
Dave Vox-Cab. Dave, very well written. Thank you. Just had a question on the first recommendation. It says to operate the H Canyon at full capability and capacity until all spent nuclear fuel in the SRS inventory is dissolved and properly disposed of. I'm just wondering, is this redundant at all, or how does it differ from the existing the codified law, the 50 U.S.C. section 2633, that requires that the H Canyon be maintained at a high state of readiness. I'm assuming that it's at full capability already, right? And that is there anything in the language of the United States Code that talks about capacity? Or is
basically what I'm saying is keep the thing open and keep all the dissolvers operating.
So
that's the capability.
Let's let Mike Michelanis.
So Mike Michelanis, Dewey, let me try and answer your question, Dave. The U.S. Code is not specific about what that means. It just uses the term high state of readiness. What that has meant to the department over the years is that we maintain the equipment in the facility operational, but more importantly, we need to maintain the operating crew proficient operating the facility, because if you shut down or put in layup a facility, after a certain period of time, the operating crew's proficiency is presumed to need to be retested and reexamined through some type of readiness assessment. So what we have done is we'll put a batch through the facility to maintain the operator's proficiency from the front end all the way to the back end, so that they remain highly ready to operate the facility. The equipment is operational. What is, I presume, meant by recommendation 1 here is that you would go beyond just putting one batch through, that you would run it up to the full capability of the facility, where you've got crews that can simultaneously run the front end and the back end of the facility as well.
Okay. Any others? Any other things that we need to change? Clarifying questions, comments? Mr. Budney.
Hey, just so you're aware what the second half of that first sentence, until all spent nuclear fuel inventory is dissolved and properly disposed of. Just so you understand what that means to us. Currently, the way the canyon operates is we dissolve the spent nuclear fuel, you would create high-level waste. That high-level waste goes into the liquid waste system to be vitrified in the Defense Waste Processing Plant. That plant's due to shut down in 2030. We cannot, and the way we do things today, get all the fuel dissolved and vitrified by 2030. It would take much longer than that. And so if we were to operate by that first recommendation, what it means is we got to figure out some more technology to disconnect the canyon from the liquid waste system. Not saying there's anything wrong with that. I just want you to understand what it means when you say that. So,
okay. Malcolm. There we go.
The construct of your sentence dealing with dry storage, I don't understand this and question its accuracy. Dry storage, although fraught with technical uncertainty, I don't think dry storage is fraught with technical uncertainty. It may be fraught with uncertainty at this juncture, driven politically in a large measure, but I've licensed ISFSIs all over the place. There's ISFSIs running, in cast designs are all over the place now. They're out there. WIP is there that's got cast in it. It's Yucca Mountain was not knocked down because of technical uncertainties. There was a political will going forward. So I'm not sure that this paints the correct picture.
There are some differences between commercial storage, some very significant differences between commercial storage and what's done at the site. We have hundreds of different types of fuel, not one. So, yeah.
So Michael Michelanis, where the disposition path for dry storage has technical uncertainties is the dry storage of aluminum-based fuel. Aluminum-clad fuel, from my understanding, is different than what the commercial utilities are using, and it has its own set of unique challenges that Idaho is working their way through right now.
All right.
Okay, if that's the case, then perhaps this should be modified to say dry storage dealing with aluminum-clad, But right now there are so many options, potential options that are available for storage of spent nuclear fuel and high-level waste, and it's just a political will issue at this juncture. To put in a recommendation that you're going to operate it at full capacity until all SFN spent nuclear fuel in the inventory is dissolved and properly disposed of, kind of obviates or denigrates the potential that in 2 years WIP will open up and you can start popping stuff to WIP, and without going through this, or and when I say open up, I mean open up to this type of material, or there's some other decisions that are made downstream, but there are potential areas that could open up to take this. That doesn't mean that the H Canyon shouldn't be operated and continue to operate as it's stated here, but to say, wow, let's kick it off and do everything at H Canyon and not at no other place is a stretch.
Any other comments? Everybody's happy with what we have. You know what you want to do tomorrow with this? Everybody feels that they've got their opinion set? Okay. That's this one. I've got a few announcements for the end of the day before we call for a recess, Gil.
Yeah, before we wrap up, in my comments this morning, I definitely made a point to thank James and his team, and what a wonderful job they did last week. But I failed to mention Kristen with Savannah River Nuclear Solutions and putting together the tour for us. If you've not had the opportunity to go on a tour that Kristen leads or directs, I don't know how many more she'll do in her career, but you've definitely missed out. And I also want to thank, he's not here, but Stuart McVean. I know Doug mentioned that Stuart came and spoke to us at the all-chair meeting, and that Savannah River Nuclear Solutions, thank you very much for what you all did. You made the meeting go extremely well, and we appreciate the time. And Kristen, you're always appreciated, so thank you so much. That's all.
All right. Thanks, Gil. So, Dave, I'm going to ask you to hang back for just a couple of minutes, because I want to know exactly where you want to add in the aluminum clad so that we can accommodate Malcolm's request. You nodded at me. Yep, we'll get Malcolm to stick around for just a few minutes. It won't take but 2 or 3. Eleanor is having an A&O meeting, an administrative and outreach meeting after this in the conference room around the corner. If you're currently an A&O member or a new member interested in being on the administrative and outreach committee, please plan to attend right after this meeting. If for some reason you feel like you're not going to be here tomorrow, please let us know, and we can go ahead and get out some absentee ballots for you. That way we make sure that your vote counts. And please also make sure you take a moment and look at the chair's meeting recording. If you had any questions about the discussions around the table and what they said, how they felt about the 2 chairs' recommendations, that's definitely something that you'll want to do. Gil? I would like it if you did it. I feel weird doing it myself.
All right. Went over a lot today. We have a lot more to go over tomorrow. Please do review the recommendations as we will vote on them tomorrow afternoon. Great dialogue, great discussion. Thank you everyone for their input. And I'm always so proud of new members that jump right in. So thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. I promise I'll be here on time. And with that, we're not closing the meeting. We'll just see you tomorrow.